Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 118. I am Chaz Licciardello, the host or co-host of Planet America on Fridays on ABC, iView, and ABC News and YouTube and all places where you go to see ill-informed commentary. And we cover on This Is PEP, we cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. And we are joined today by the special guest PEPCaster, Melina Wicks.
Hello.
TV producer / writer / researcher / everything. Literally everything. This was not, you might have noticed this is not Monday, as promised. I've been on a bit of a publicity tour for What the FAQ, which is a new show that Melina and I worked on together.
Yes.
Yes, indeedy. Opening night.
Yes.
Nervous?
It's exciting.
Yeah? I'm nervous.
People should watch it. Watch it on iView. It's going to be great.
That will make me less nervous if you watch it. I'd like a second series, please. Yeah, it is on iView. You should watch it. Yes. And then basically, we answer people's questions, which you can send. By the way, Melina drew my attention last year to a question sent in by Black Adam in the comments from this podcast.
Yes.
And we answered it.
We did.
Yeah.
Specifically, you and I did. We
Yes.
wrote that one. So
right.
we did that for you.
Exactly.
Hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. So there you go. So ask questions. You can ask them in the comments. You can ask them. Just go to iView and there's a link there to our form. You can submit a question. Do you have any favorite questions? I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that, but off the top of your head, that you were working on that. Anything that interested you?
There's
Even ones that didn't get up.
There's one which maybe I'm thinking about because it's heavily in the promos, but I love that I did together with Cameron James, which is what's the least edible food?
Yes.
And Cameron James is a real hero. He put himself through a lot of punishment. It's very easy for me as a co-writer to just like make a bunch of horrible suggestions for things for him to ingest.
Yeah.
I don't have to do it, and he did it. So credit to him, and it's very funny.
Yes.
And so, yes.
Yeah, I like that one.
I do like that one.
That was a good one. Look, like there's a few things tonight. There's like, what happens when you turn your phone on in a plane? Is it true that you can actually lift a car to save a baby as suggested by various news articles? What else is there? The old tomato sauce one. Do you keep it in the fridge or do you keep it in the cupboard? Anyway, watch it for yourself. I'm going to stop promoting this. Every single. Oh, I should have flagged this to you. You can spend a couple of seconds while I talk about this, just thinking there's anything in the world you're thankful for. Because recently, you would know this. I've been starting podcasts with things that I'm thankful for. And I'm going to start off here. I'm just going to talk about one thing. And if you don't think of something in 10 seconds or 20 seconds, whatever, that's fine. Doesn't matter. I'm sorry I took you by surprise. Normally I give Melina a word of this kind of stuff. But this week I am thankful for Kevin Drum. Now, a lot of people, you're probably going, huh? Kevin Drum? What? A lot of people ask me about what I read because they know I do a lot of reading. You really don't want to read everything I read. Trust me, some of it is very poor quality. But I just like to get as many different sources as possible. But every now and then I'll throw out a bone to you guys, and today I'm throwing out the bone of Kevin Drum. He's a blogger since the beginning of blogging, like since the 90s. He's been there the whole time. He's been there like 25 years. He's kind of centre-left as far as politics goes, but anyone can read him because he's not ideological at all. He basically blogs out data. As much as anything. Like he's just a data crawler. That's always been his thing. He just goes through extremely complicated tables and then crunches them. He'll make various adjustments, like for inflation or whatever, like sensible adjustments, and then he'll graph them for you. And it's really, really useful stuff. I use him all the time. He's as responsible as anyone is for the lead crime hypothesis because he crunched so much data about that like 15 years ago. And he's responsible for a lot of people's discoveries about that. Like that was his thing for a while. That when I say the lead crime hypothesis, I'm talking about the theory that the reason there was this big crime spike in the 80s and 90s was because of the prevalence of lead in petrol, and that when they removed the lead from petrol, crime went down. 20 years later, when those kids who would have otherwise been poisoned by lead grew up, because the theory was that lead gives you brain damage and makes you more violent and aggressive. Anyway, he was the one who popularized that through his number crunching. And anyway, he's a weird guy. He's definitely somewhere on the spectrum. He's a very strange guy. He's probably not too far from me on the spectrum, to be honest, if I've been straight. But it means he could say anything at all. He's totally fearless. He gets himself into real trouble at times. I'm amazed he hasn't been cancelled. He's probably too small to get cancelled. But he just goes where the data goes, basically. And these days he doesn't do much proper blogging because he's basically dying of multiple myelina. Like he's been going for a while with that. He puts graphs up of his of his own data. That's the kind of guy he is.
That's one way to process trauma.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Look, I mean, maybe he'll pull through, but it's not great. Anyway, he has good days and bad days, but he still finds the time to do a few short posts a day. With some random data, just random data. It's not like he's making a point half the time. It's just, I found this. Here you go. And he just passes it on. He's not, it's really interesting. But anyway, I promise you if you follow him, it's like jabberwalking.com. If you just look up Kevin Drum, you'll find him on through Google. I think it's jabberwalking.com is the site. I promise you if you follow him, you at least find once every 3 or 4 days a stat or a graph that you will find useful and you have seen nowhere. Because he does his own research. So you have seen it nowhere at all. And I use him so much on Planet America. So anyway, I'm thankful for Kevin Drum. That gave you a bit of time, Melina. Are you thankful for anything?
I mean, I can listen to my personal life, which feel a bit naff, but politically, no, I don't. I haven't prepared anything, but I do also like the work of Kevin Drum. So I'll just second your thankfulness for him.
I definitely put Melina on the hard word on Melina with Kevin Drum before. I do like him a lot. Okay, all right, that's enough of that. Let's do some updates. We've got a few updates here. I might push one or two towards the end. I know we put them at the top just because I want to get onto the Supreme Court. Because this is PEP 118 is the Supreme Court special.
Finally.
I've been teasing for so long. But yeah, let's do some updates first. The debate. There was a couple of things which I either didn't pick up or I just didn't have time to mention last time, which I'd just like to throw in there in the aftermath of the debate, which I think is worth noting. If you have any thoughts about the debate, you can just chip in or afterwards. Okay, first of all, there's an important fact check I need to get out there, which is Nikki Haley. Wait, whoa! Now you know what my ringtone sounds like.
What is it?
It's that sketch from I Think You Should Leave. From that sketch from I Think You Should Leave about the country singer about does the thing about the zombies in season 1. I wasn't prepared for that. Kirsten's going crazy here. Okay. Important fact check. Nikki Haley won lots of plaudits from people who don't vote Republican when she said that Trump was the least popular politician in America. The non-Republican voters love that, right? Lots of plaudits. That is not true. That is not true. So I need to fact check that. The most hated popular politician in America by a mile is Mitch McConnell. We need to get that out there. Trump is, not far behind. But, McConnell, his net favorability is minus 35 points. His favorability, so his positives are 35 points below his negatives. Trump's only minus 19. So he's a rank amateur compared to Mitch McConnell. So I want to get that fact check out there. Secondly, another Haley-related moment which I wanted to point to was, and I didn't think of this is something I read someone else saying this, and I just want to pass it on. I thought that's a great observation. There was a really important abortion moment. I didn't phrase that well. A moment involving the abortion issue during the debate. Nikki Haley was arguing with Mike Pence about abortion. She was saying that they have never had more than 45 pro-life senators, ever. And so there was no prospect of passing any federal abortion bans. Mike Pence said that's consultation is not leadership. And he kept saying 70% of America supports a 15-week ban. We can get this done, a 15-week ban. And that was the argument, if you recall. All right, first of all, he's wrong on the polls, like the AP poll, like that. I mean, maybe that was the case in biblical times, which I know Mike Pence is very familiar with. But today, in 2023, most of the polls, and I'll cite the AP poll from June, for example, say that basically it's a 50-50 proposition, a 15-week ban. About 50% of America favours a 15-week ban. 50% does not. So that they're unlikely to get that up pass the filibuster. All right? That's the polls. But that's not the interesting point. The interesting point is this. How far has the abortion debate moved when Mr. Fetal Personhood Amendment, Pence himself, for those who don't know what the Fetal Personhood Amendment, it's the idea that fetuses have human rights, which would basically ban all abortion. Right? There'll be murder.
Life begins at conception.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that's what Mike Pence has been pushing forever. And now he's pushing a 15-week ban. Like and he's calling that leadership, brave leadership. Like that is a real indication of how far the abortion debate has moved in the last year. I think that's probably the best example you could possibly cite. Mike Pence has pulled back to a 15-week abortion ban. So I thought that was worth noting. I thought it was great.
Yes. I was trying to pull up the stat. I couldn't do it fast enough. But
Yeah.
the overwhelming majority of abortions in America happen in the first trimester, which is earlier than 15 weeks.
Yes.
So, the idea that these pro-life conservatives who have spent literally decades talking about how abortion is murder are now suddenly comfortable with pushing as leadership to leave the vast majority of abortions intact. And most of the ones that happen later than that are the ones that involve medical complications.
Yeah.
So they're the ones which in any kind of broadly supported 15-week ban would be accepted as well.
Yeah.
It's basically status quo. It ideologically doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, it's still a step backwards in terms of access, but the idea, I agree with you. They've come so far in terms of what they're willing to countenance because, as it turns out, political considerations outweigh their deep-seated morality.
Yeah. I'd love to. I mean, I know what they'd say, but I'd love a Democrat to put to one of these people. How about if we support the 15-week ban? If you support federal legislation to make abortion legal for 15 weeks. How about we do that? Because I know Democrats probably wouldn't go for that, but that would be a great deal. Because as you say, that would not rule out many abortions in the blue states, but it would add a hell of a lot of abortions in the red states.
Yes.
So that's
I suspect they wouldn't go for that.
yes.
I suspect the Republicans wouldn't.
Yeah.
As much as,
I understand. I suspect no one would go for it,
Yeah.
but that's my mischievous little thought. The low point of the debate, I can't believe I forgot this. As I was watching it, I was just going, mental note, must mention this on the show, on both shows, on the podcast and the show. And I forgot on both of them to mention what was the low. I mean, I was probably the most positive person I have seen other than the DeSantis camp about DeSantis. Like pretty much every analysis I saw from any pundit when I went, DeSantis sucked a bit. And my line was, look, he did what he was supposed to do. And the post polls suggest, will vindicate me somewhat. But having said that, he really did provide the low point of the debate. And I do need to note this because it was pathetic, which was like DeSantis is he's essentially a human weather vane, and he was no more a human weather vane than personifying that physically on the question when they asked for a show of support for people who would support Trump if he was convicted. They asked for a show of hands.
You all signed a pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee. If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would. Just hold on.
So for those who aren't watching this, for those who are listening to this, which is most of the people taking this in this podcast, DeSantis looked comically from one side to the other side and then half raised his hand. It was genuinely like comedy. It was so spineless. And I should say Pence raised his hand after DeSantis half as well, which was a bit weird. But he didn't look from side to side the same way DeSantis did. It was just like he could not have moved his head more when he looked from side to side. It was just funny, just how cowardly he was. So I just want to note that. Yeah, I mean, and that may cost him at some point in time. There may be. Either side could use it. At some point in time, someone could run that vision, and just focusing on him, zooming on him. It is pathetic vision. So I just want to acknowledge that, even though I thought generally he did what he was meant to do. He wasn't doing what he was meant to do during that moment. I know it was a tough moment for him to try and because he's trying to balance both the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump people. But yeah, no, that wasn't good. On the other hand, I also want to note that 7 of the 8 people said that Mike Pence did the right thing on January 6th. And Ramaswamy was the odd one out. He wasn't asked, so he didn't have the opportunity to say it. You might think that's no big deal, but you might think it's a low bar. But let me just note, there is a poll from CBS News that Republicans asked if Pence did the right thing. 36% said yes, 27% said no, and 37% weren't sure. So they're kind of divided. So that is actually a slightly gutsy move in a primary to do the hands up thing in that regard. So I just want to give him credit for that. Like do you have any thoughts on anything like this or anything on debate before I move on to more Ramaswamy stuff?
On the debate, I just want to think there was a great observation in the New Yorker Politics podcast that there were 2 people on stage in that debate whose lives Trump had threatened in a quite meaningful way. One being Mike Pence with January 6th, people chanting "Hang Mike Pence," and Trump being very slow to discourage the sort of fever-pitched violence of the day. And then Chris Christie, who Trump gave COVID to, like,
of course,
Trump knew he had COVID, was doing debate prep with Chris Christie in a previous cycle, obviously, and Chris Christie got COVID from Trump and nearly died.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And John's theory is that, which he said on the show last week, is that that's part of what's informing Chris Christie's animus against Trump. He hasn't forgotten that Trump nearly killed him. That's especially he's overweight and he's a high risk person as well.
Yeah.
And it was just
he did nearly die. It's not just like he could have because he's high risk. He was hospitalized for a while. It was
totally I mean, my view is that this is mind reading, of course. My view is that the animus that Chris Christie has against Trump is part. I don't want to rule out that he genuinely believes what he's saying, but also I think his pride was wounded a bit by the way Trump treated him in 20. He clearly just treated him like his bitch, essentially. And Chris Christie, if he has any pride at all, I'm sure he doesn't enjoy that. It's not like Ted Cruz, he can just keep on keeping on, and despite all the wounds to his pride. But yeah, I could see how I think Chris Christie hasn't forgotten that, and I think he, as a point of pride, he wants to get his balls back, essentially. That's what I think is partly going on myself. I know, well, mind reading. Do you have any thoughts on Chris Christie?
He also just seems like someone who likes fighting and attention. So why not? I mean, I'm sure all these reasons are true. It doesn't have to be one reason why he wants to do it. And I suspect he's enjoying his time in the spotlight.
Yeah, he does
having lots of goes
fun.
at Trump.
Yeah, no, that is fair. Any other thoughts on the debate? No?
Let's talk about Vivek.
Okay, let's talk about Vivek. Yes. The reason why it's relevant here, apart from the debate, is that I did mention last week about, I said, that Vivek wasn't given the chance at the debate to answer the Mike Pence question, and National Review pinholed him. He tried to get away from them, and they pinholed him, and he gave this answer, which I thought was a terrible answer. I then tuned in to Meet the Press. I shouldn't say tune in to Meet the Press. I just saw this clip. I'm not like Katie McEnany. Just something to look out for with Katie McEnany on Fox News, as a little side, is that she pretends that she just happened to watch on TV every clip she throws to. And sometimes the 2 clips are on at the same time. They're on different programs at the same time. It's really obvious that she just doesn't watch any of this shit. And she's just trying to I couldn't believe when I turned this on. So I'm not going to do that. I didn't watch the whole Meet the Press. I just saw this clip. That Ramaswamy was asked on Meet the Press 4 days later, the same question. He gave the same answer on air. It's a terrible answer. Here we go. I'll just play it now.
Most of the candidates on stage Wednesday night said Mike Pence did the right thing on January 6th. Do you agree?
I would have done it very differently. I think that there was a historic opportunity that he missed to reunite this country in that window. What I would have said is this is a moment for a true national consensus where there's 2 elements of what's required for a functioning democracy in America. One is secure elections, and the second is a peaceful transfer of power. When those things come into conflict, that's an opportunity for heroism. Here's what I would have said. We need single-day voting on Election Day. We need paper ballots, and we need government-issued ID matching the voter file. And if we achieve that, then we have achieved victory, and we should not have any further complaint about election integrity.
So what would
I would have
you have
driven
done
it through the Senate.
So what would you have done with Mike Pence? You would have not certified the election?
So in my capacity as president of the Senate, I would have led through that level of reform. Then on that condition, certified the election results, served it up to the president,
Yeah.
President Trump, then to sign that into law, and on January 7th, declared the re-election campaign pursuant to a free and fair election. I think that was a missed opportunity, but that's the kind of spirit we're going to need to unite this country rather than sweeping those concerns under the rug.
It's a slightly smoother version of the same answer, but it's the same answer, essentially, that he is saying that he would pass. Like, if he was Mike Pence, he would seemingly single-handedly pass a heavily Republican-leaning election reform bill.
He would draft, write up and pass a law.
Yes, that the VP has no role in the legislation at all. Like, he's the president of the Senate, but he doesn't draft legislation. But anyway.
In an hour while people are trying to actively invade the Capitol.
Yes, and he would somehow get the Democrats to support that because it has to get past the filibuster, even though all three of those elements the Democrats don't support. And he would do that, and then he would certify the votes. I don't know. He still didn't say if he'd certify the votes or not. He just said, I would pass this legislation, and that's it. Like, I think it's assumed he would then certify the votes after that legislation was drafted and voted on and passed.
In which case Trump would be not president and running again now, which is what's happened anyway. So the outcome would not have been wildly different anyway.
No. Oh, but by the way, Democrats had the House at the time as well. Kirsten, I know Kirsten watches this podcast. Please stop messaging me. I know it's not live. But when you listen to this podcast, you will know how many times you message me during the podcast. It's Kirsten Drysdale. On What the FAQ, by the way.
Watch it on iView.
We all hang around together as a team, messaging each other during podcasts. So it's a mysterious answer, but he stuck with it. Even 4 days later, when you had the chance to rethink it. For what it's worth, by the way, I'm interested in your view on this. This is another question out notice. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of these to you later. Ramaswamy's legislation he's talking about, the one about the so national voter card, paper ballots, all voting on one day. I would support that if you made that day a public holiday and people who had to work on that public holiday could pre-vote.
Well, that's the key. Obviously, I think it's crazy that they vote on a Tuesday and it's not a public holiday.
Yeah.
So I do think if you're going to try and encourage same-day voting, making it a public holiday if it's not a weekend is a good reform.
Yeah.
But you do have to have something in place for people who... because people still have to work.
That's right.
You don't want people shutting down hospitals and stuff because everyone has to vote on the one day, otherwise fraud.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, so just for the sake of it, I actually would. I mean, I don't think it's got anything to do with Mike Pence, but that legislation, even though it's ostensibly Republican legislation, I think could be tweaked so that at least I'd support it. But I'm not a Democrat, so they wouldn't support it. Anyway. So that was interesting. He stuck with it 4 days later, which I found really weird. In fact, I don't know if it's lazy or if he just thinks that's a great answer, but I would have come up with a better answer after the National Review had nailed me on it. I would have come up with a better answer for when I was on TV 4 days later. But anyway, because it was going to get asked on camera. The final debate polls were interesting. Talking about Ramaswamy, the detailed polling from 538 was before and after the debate from debate watchers. All right, so this is from people who only watch the debate. So you need to bear that in mind, okay? Because there would have been some hardcore Trumpers who just watched the Tucker Carlson one, who didn't watch the debate. And there would have been people who just weren't interested. Like the Washington Post poll suggested, I think 33% of Republican primary voters watched the debate, either in part or in full. So that means left 67% who didn't, right? That's a lot of people, right? But anyway, amongst those who watched the debate, DeSantis' favourables went up from 67.5 to 72.5. That's a net favourability of 7 going up. I know that's 5 more favourables, but his unfavourables went down by 2. So I'm doing net favourabilities here. So net favourabilities went up by 7. Trump's favourabilities went down from 64.7 to 59.8. His net favourabilities went down by 7. Don't get excited about that. Like I just said, that's the 33% of Republican primary voters who watched the debate. Does not include the Trumpist, most hardcore people. It's not indicative of the entire race. So don't get excited about that. But I'm just saying their stats. Pence favorabilities went from 38 to 42.6, and the net favorabilities went up by 8. Haley's favorabilities went from 51.7 to 65.5. Her net favorability went up by 13. So Haley's a lot more popular than Pence.
She had a good debate.
But still 23 points more popular. That's a lot.
I mean, who likes Pence?
Well,
I find his candidacy the most mystifying of all.
That's the conclusion I think you can draw. In fact, Christie's favorabilities aren't much lower. Christie's went from 23.4 favourable to 35.2. So he's only 7 below Pence amongst those debate watchers. Net favorabilities went up by 13 for Chris Christie. So by those numbers, he had a pretty good debate. Scott went from 58.5 favourables to 65.3. His negs went from 12.3 to 23.2 though. He had 11 more unfavourables, so his net is down by 4. Which leaves the Ramaswamy. His favourability went from 50.2 to 60.4, which is reasonably popular, although not as favourable as Haley, who was 65. Once again, not counting the hardcore Trumpists, so I bet prefer Ramaswamy to Haley though. So overall, I bet he's ahead of Haley. But his negatives went from 12.9 to 31.8. So his net favourabilities went down by 9. So that's really interesting. He did piss off a lot of Republican primary voters. I mean, like that went... So his negatives went up by almost 20. That's huge.
Well, I suppose there are a lot of people who didn't have an opinion of him before the debates who got their first look at him. And one of the most memorable moments in the debate was Nikki Haley dunking on him in like a pretty forceful way, which was a good moment. Like, it's not surprising to me that she's gone up by quite a bit, and a lot of people have taken not as much of a shine to Vivek. But I also feel like for people, like, the debate kind of clarified for me in a way. Someone like Nikki Haley, she's not going to win, obviously, but she has a case for running. And same for people like Christie, when she makes the argument of, I like Trump, we all like Trump, but Trump can't win because too many people in the general public hate him, and that's why we need to nominate someone else. I don't think that anywhere near a majority of Republican primary voters are going to agree with her on that, but it's a logical case and it's a reason to run. But DeSantis and Ramaswamy, who are running to be the new Trump, just doesn't make sense in a field where there's still Trump. And I was thinking about it last night. This is as mentioned before the show, the analogy that popped into my head as I was falling asleep last night that I decided held up enough by this morning that I'm going to say it. But it's like, to me, they're like a cover band of a really popular band. So if you take a band like ABBA, the Bjorn Again cover band is really, really popular. People who love ABBA love Bjorn Again. They have a favorable view of this very well-polished cover band, especially because ABBA doesn't tour. But no one in the world is going to choose to see Bjorn Again over ABBA if they can see ABBA. If you're not a fan of either of them, you don't go to either of them. But if you're a fan of ABBA and you can see ABBA, you're going to see them over the band that's trying to be ABBA.
That is a wonderful analogy. You don't realise this, but I've literally spent the last week on an ABBA tear. So you're speaking directly to me. I've just been on YouTube just watching like the most obscure ABBA songs.
Well, I don't like ABBA or Trump, so it's a good analogy for me in that sense.
I definitely wouldn't watch Beyond again. That's a good analogy. You know who you're reflecting there? Because this is a clip I was thinking of pulling up for this podcast, but I forgot about it, so it doesn't matter. You're channeling Chris Christie.
Oh.
This is an argument he used on the weekend. That exact point where he put it differently. He didn't talk about ABBA. It was a real shame. He should have. That's a great analogy. But I don't think he's even heard of Beyond Again. But he did.
I feel like he might have. But anyway, go on.
No, he might be a Beyond Again fan. He put it this way. He said, "Well, if Vivek genuinely believes that Donald Trump is the greatest president of the 21st century, then why are you running? Give up tomorrow. Just support his campaign because he's still in the race. What is the reason for you to be in the race if the greatest president of the 21st century is up against you? Just support the greatest president of the 21st century, which I thought was a fair point to make.
Yeah, I had the same thought.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess his argument is he would be even better than the greatest president of the 21st century.
Maybe.
Which, as you pointed out, I think on Planet America main show is not that much of a compliment because there's only been 4.
Yeah,
but
that's right. Yeah, and
yeah,
they're not all popular either. Yes. But yes. Anyway, but I want to just on Ramaswamy as well. I want to make a correction because a few people drew my attention to a mistake I made last week, both on the podcast and on the show. I want to thank you, by the way, for doing so. I don't talk about this a lot. If you see me make a mistake, please call it out in the comments. I'm not some politics god. I don't have any qualifications. Well, I've been to uni, but not doing US politics. I'm just a normal person who spends way too long reading this stuff. So I make mistakes. It's best for all of us if you tell me what those mistakes are, and I'll try to correct them ASAP. I mean, give me the evidence. I'm not just going to believe you if you go, oh, you're wrong. No, but you know, if you make a case, I will correct it ASAP in the forum in which I made my mistake. So I'm going to do this on both here and on the show, Planet America. Ramaswamy said the climate change agenda was a hoax. I said on this podcast and on the show that he said climate change was a hoax. Even after I played the clip where he said the climate change agenda was a hoax. So I just have misheard him and I was just in my own little world. Ironically, this was part of me critiquing him for being loose with his language. And I was loose with my interpretation of his language. So because those two phrases are different. The climate change agenda is different to climate change, right? I played him saying that he believed in the science of climate change on both shows. So he clearly does believe that man-made climate change is happening. He's not saying it's not happening, right? His position, just to be clear, is that the fear of climate change, what he calls the agenda, the climate change agenda, the fear of climate change is the hoaxy bit, right? And that he thinks that mankind can adapt. Okay, and to be honest, I think sometimes the fear is overstated by the media and by various politicians. We're all going to die in 12 years, those kinds of people. But I don't think like Ramaswamy thinks.
Yeah.
He's a lot further along that path than I am. But I disagree with him, but we need to be specific about what he says. Because contrary to what I said last week, I was wrong about the fact that he is loose with his language, because I've been watching a lot of him in the last week or so, and he's not loose at all. He acts like he's loose, but he's actually super precise. And that's something that I've criticized Trump for in the past, for being loose. So Ramaswamy is an improvement on Trump in that regard, that he's actually very precise with his language, but he likes to create the impression that he's loose, I believe. And yes, I know what people there are probably thinking, what people listening to this are probably going, well, hang on. He's, like you said last week, he uses that kind of language, the climate change agenda, to create kinship with people who think that the climate change is a hoax. He's trying to associate with these people and try and bond with them without using the precise language that would be on their side. So he has deniability. I get that, but nevertheless, given that he goes to the trouble of being precise, I should go to the trouble of being precise in my critiques of him as well. So anyways, that's correction. And it's similar to what I was saying last week about 9/11, that he uses very precise language about 9/11, I believe, to form kinship with people who are conspiracists about 9/11 without actually endorsing those conspiracies himself. Like, he's very precisely not endorsing those conspiracies. It's kind of tricky wording. Having said that, I also, while I'm doing corrections, I should say correction from Sean Ross and Robert Pryden on YouTube. I said the replacement rate is 2.1 for fertility. Sorry, is 1.7 for fertility. It's actually 2.1. The reason I said 1.7 is because that's the number gets thrown around in American politics all the time because they take into consideration immigration. But that was sloppy of me. Like, generally speaking, 2.1 is a replacement. But in America, they often throw around 1.7. That's why I said 1.7. But yeah, I just should say that. It's 2.1 kids per person to keep the population steady, unless you have immigration. But yes, I just want to, I will get to the 9/11 thing. In fact, I'll get to the 9/11 thing right now because I mentioned it last week. It's become so much bigger in the last week. I've read at least 20 people talking about him being a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. It's bullshit. So I'm going to read you the actual quote, okay? You'll see the precise language I'm talking about. And this is off the fly, okay? So John Hendrickson from The Atlantic said, when you talk about all the things, we can handle the truth about X, and you list off a bunch of stuff. One of them that you said last night is, we can handle the truth about January 6th. What is the truth about January 6th that you're referring to? Vivek, I don't know, but we can handle it. Whatever it is, we can handle it. Government agents. How many government agents were in the field, right? Hendrickson, you mean like entrapment? Ramaswamy, yeah, absolutely. Why can the government not be transparent about something that we're using? Terrorists or the kind of tactics used to fight terrorists. And then he went on for a while while we get the next relevant bit. I think it's legitimate to say how many police, how many federal agents were on the planes that hit the Twin Towers. That came out of nowhere, by the way. I didn't leave the lead up to that. I think maybe the answer is 0. Probably is 0 for all I know, right? I have no reason to think it's anything other than 0. But if we're doing a comprehensive assessment of what happened on 9/11, we have a 9/11 commission. Absolutely, that should be an answer the public knows the answer to. Well, if we're doing a January 6th commission, absolutely, those should be questions that we should get to the bottom of. And then a little bit later, Hendrickson said, I think it's interesting to compare and contrast 9/11 and January 6th. Ramaswamy, I don't think they belong in the same conversation. I'm only bringing it up because I'm not making the comparison. I think it's a ridiculous comparison. But I'm saying that I brought it up only because it was invoked as a basis for the January 6th commission. Hendrickson said, of course. So that is the quote that they're talking about him being 9/11 conspiracies. He's clearly drawing a parallel, an analogy. He's not saying there were government agents on. He explicitly says there were not government agents. So I just want to put that out there because he's getting... I've got lots of critiques about the guy, but that one isn't fair. Do you have any more thoughts about Ramaswamy?
No.
No? Okay. Well, I'll just add a couple of thoughts before we go on. Just a little more Rama facts that I've found over the week. There's one more thing he has in common with Trump. His company is based in Bermuda for tax reasons. And so he likes to avoid tax. He's currently avoiding a subpoena there in Bermuda, using his presidential campaign as an excuse.
Isn't not paying tax the thing Republicans are trying to put Hunter Biden in prison for?
Yeah, although to be fair, that's
I know.
I know. It's a nice little swing. Remember how DeSantis copped crap because he opened up the idea of using RFK Jr. as some kind of roving agent of mischief for the FDA and CDC? Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Ramaswamy outright said he could possibly pick RFK Jr. as his running mate. So he actually said that. He didn't hint it and talk about CDCs. But the most important thing, the reason you're going, why are you still talking about Ramaswamy? The reason why is because the most important thing I found, I can't believe I've missed this until now, is more hidden rapping. And this is not even him doing Lose Yourself.
God.
This is him just freestyling.
Oh,
you ready?
No. I'm not ready.
And if you go, by the way, as a little side, guys, Melina is the biggest fan of rap I know. So Melina, I'm going to need you to critically evaluate this rap. And what better audience to rap in front of than Steve Doocy?
How old is this?
This is from the 27th of July.
Oh, that's much too recent.
Yeah, here we go. You ready? So he's running for president at this point in time.
My name's Vivek. It rhymes with cake. It ain't about thee. It isn't about me. It is about thee. The United States is about liberty. So Fox and friends, join us on the trail. We'll have some fun. I'll see you out the trail.
Very nicely done, sir.
Oh, no.
Steve Doocy likes it. What do you reckon?
That's upsetting.
For those who only heard that, and that was upsetting, what's the most upsetting is a visual element. I recommend that you go to the YouTube or Facebook video of this and have a look at this moment, because you need to see Steve Doocy bopping his head to the rap.
It does feel like the first rap he's ever listened to in his life. He's like, this is quite good. Rhymes.
If indeed it is rap. That's generous. That's generous. Eminem clearly agrees with you, by the way, because he's now sent a cease and desist on Ramaswamy doing Lose Yourself. The cruelest cut. I reckon Eminem should do a sequel to Stan called Vivek. Anyway, I'm going to end the show with one more. I found one more example, but I don't want to do too much rapping too close to each other because it might blow your mind. So I'll end the show with one more Vivek freestyle. I can't believe there's all this freestyle out there.
Oh my God.
Anyway.
I can't believe, like, it's one thing for clips from when he was in college or whatever to be surfaced, but I can't believe he's doing it on the campaign trail. That's the kind of judgment that disqualifies you from being president.
Well, that's true. I mean, I suppose, like I said last week, he's trying to be fun. And he is fun. He is fun. I mean, look, that's not fun.
That's not fun.
That's not fun. That's painful. But yeah, you hit and you miss. Like he is often fun. Like and he's trying to channel that fun aspect of Trump. And I think he is generally successful.
Trying is the operative word in that clip.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. The only other thing I want to say, I want to play a clip. Now, you guys might want to skip this clip because this is quite a frustrating clip. I'm going to play the whole clip because I think it illustrates a broader issue with the political rhetoric and why we can't have nice rhetorical things. This is from the Sunday show, from the CNN Sunday show this week. And so I'm just going to set up briefly. This is involving Vivek. This is my last thing. I promise you, we'll move on from Vivek. The whole point of this podcast is getting deep. So sometimes it takes a while. Okay. Now this clip goes for 5 minutes. So you can skip forward 5 or 6 minutes because I've got a minute set up. You can skip forward 6 minutes if you don't want to hear it. But if you get agitated, don't throw objects at me, please, or at your phone. It starts with Dana Bash on CNN bringing up Ayanna Presley's statement from 2019. She said, "We don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice." Now, I think Presley defining what a brown person is allowed to think is at best super hackish and obnoxious, at worst racist. But yeah, if she'd said, "We don't need any more conservatives," you wouldn't have been surprised to hear that's what she thinks. And that is essentially a less racially fraught way of saying the same thing. She's not commenting on black people. She's commenting on conservatives. That's what she's commenting on. Anyway, but you might disagree with that. That's my view. Do you have a thought about that? That Ayanna Presley quote before we go on?
No, you can please response.
That's fine. Ramaswamy disagrees with me. He this week said in reference to that, "These are the words of the modern grand wizards of the modern KKK." Whew! Now, Dana Bash then goes on to get him to acknowledge that he might have gone a bit over the top there. She's not trying to get him to apologise. She's not trying to bully him into submission. She's trying to reason with him carefully and precisely and get him to at least acknowledge that might not have been the ideal choice of words. That's all she's looking for, right? And she's not letting him get away with slippery evasion. He tries very hard to get away with slippery evasion and she's not having it. Ramaswamy is hell-bent on not conceding anything. He's happy to debate her. He's happy to engage with her in his usually extremely precise, Bush-lawyerly way, but he is determined not to concede even the tiniest error. This is how it goes for 5 minutes.
You took issue with comments from Congresswoman Ayanna Presley. She reportedly said, quote, "We don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. About that, you said, "These are the words of the modern grand wizards of the modern KKK." You know, I'm sure, the KKK was responsible for more than a century's worth of horrific lynchings, rapes, murders of black people. How in any way are the views you're talking about comparable to the views and atrocities committed by the KKK?
What I said is the grand wizards of the KKK would be proud of what they would hear her say, because there's nothing more racist than saying that your skin color predicts something about the content of your viewpoints or your
You didn't just say they
ideas.
would be proud. You said these are the words of the modern grand wizards of the modern KKK.
It is the same spirit. You're right about that, Dana. I think it is the same spirit to say that I can look at you and based on just your skin color, that I know something about the content of your character, that I know something about the content of the viewpoints you're allowed to express. For Ayanna Presley to tell me that because of my skin color, I can't express my views, that is wrong. It is divisive. It is driving hate in this country. This is dividing our country to a breaking point.
That is a debate that is based on nonviolent discussion. That you just said you're using rhetoric, which she said she's using rhetoric. that's one thing. And another thing is to say that she represents, and she is a modern version of a KKK, which, as you know, was dedicated to the subjugation and violence against Black people. How on earth is she a modern grand wizard
let's be intellectually
of that
honest.
kind of organization?
Let's be intellectually honest and get to the heart of what this debate ought to be about. There is a worldview that says that the remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. That if you're Black or brown, you have to have a particular point of view. That's from Ibram Kendi. That's from Ayanna Pressley, the people I quoted in my speech yesterday.
But can
There's
you
a
have
different
an
view
intellectually
that I have,
honest
says that regardless
conversation
of who you are,
when you accuse
have to
her
be able
of
to have your own
being a
opinion.
grand wizard
Let's
of
have
the
the
KKK?
debate.
Can you have that intellectually
the
honest
point is-
discussion with that kind of rhetoric?
Yes, I can, Dana, because the point I'm highlighting is that even the people who, in good spirit, we all agree that the KKK was an awful organization that is a toxic stain in our national history. So given that we can start from that point of agreement, now that allows us to say, well, who actually sounds more like that organization today? The people who are calling for more racial discrimination on the basis of skin color. So yes, I think that is an
But it's not
intellectually
about
useful starting point for a
sounding
provocative discussion
The whole-
that we need to have in this
the
country.
whole point
And
is
I
the
think that- I
KKK
think the reality,
wasn't
Dana,
just
is
about rhetoric.
We have to speak
They
openly in this
lynched
country.
people, they murdered people, they raped people, they burned their homes.
And that was wrong.
Simply
That was
because
obviously
of,
wrong.
so
Wrong.
Okay,
Obvious-
so
that-
again,
that is obviously a wrong
if you
thing
want to
for
have
them
an
to have done.
intellectual
Absolutely.
discussion, do you think that maybe comparing her to the Grand Wizard and the notion of what she said to being a modern leader of the KKK was maybe a step too far, or you stand by what you said?
I stand by what I said to provoke an open and honest discussion in this country, because there is a gap, Dana, between what people will say in private today and what they will say in public. I think we need to close that gap. I think we need to have real, open, honest, raw conversation as Americans. That is our path to national unity. And there are many Americans today who are deeply frustrated by the new culture
I'm
of
just not
anti-racism
sure how
that's really racism and new
provoking a
clothing.
discussion-
And we need to have that debate in the open. Dana, I think
I'm
that
not
you're
so
doing,
sure how
with due
provoking
respect,
a
what many in the
discussion
media do,
of-
picking on some fringe comment in the context of a broader context that I was offering it in a speech.
All right, so
avoiding
you
the
just
meat
said that
of
your
the
comment
issue.
was fringe.
Let's have the courage to confront the meat of that. No, I'm saying you drew a
You
fringe
just
comment from a
described your
much
comment
longer
as fringe.
speech. As I described you picking one fringe comment from a long speech that I gave to duck debate from the real issue that I think you don't want to have, Dana, because I think you probably agree with me on this, that this is toxic
I think that
rhetoric
this debate-
from leading politicians
I think that this
on
debate
dividing
is-
us on the basis of race, and I want to have
I
the
think
open
this debate is fascinating and interesting and opening and important. What I did was
I do too.
explain to our viewers that you were asked a question and you took it to a point where you called a sitting member of Congress who is Black, who was having discussions about race, calling her the modern grand wizard of the KKK. And I'm just not sure how that's open and honest discussion. I want to move on, though, to another issue, a very important issue, and that is
before I
climate
move on,
change.
I want to say that the
Sure,
question was,
please.
how was I actually able to speak? And her view is I can't share certain views because my skin color is brown. I disagree with her, and we should have that debate in the open.
Okay, Melina, what does that do for you?
Yeah, not heaps. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that if he was interested in a reasonable debate, he's well within his rights to debate the point that Ayanna Pressley made, that you're allowed to be Black and conservative. You're allowed, or a person of color and conservative.
Totally.
And, you know, it's not for her to say you're not a legitimate person of color if you are conservative or have a conservative viewpoint. But, like, Dana Bash is right to compare that to being the leader of the Ku Klux Klan that murdered people on the basis of their race is not an apt description. And it's just very unserious of him to respond the way he did.
Yeah. No,
Doesn't impress me.
No, don't impress me much, to quote Shania Twain. Look, I think he's right that she's picking a minor comment from a longer speech that he was making. That's true. I mean, that's by definition true. But you can't tell me he didn't drop that bomb in the speech on purpose to get attention, for people to pick up on it. Of course he did.
If it's in a speech, it's not off the cuff, so it's his considered remarks.
Even if it was off the cuff, he'd say it's off the cuff. He didn't. He spent 5 minutes refusing to say that. He could have said that. It's not like she was beating him over the head with it. She was just wanting him to acknowledge that it wasn't ideal. He could have easily said it was just an off the cuff comment. I could have in hindsight, it might not have been ideal. Like, that's all he needed to say. Like, he was refusing to say that. You can't tell me that I was going to say that for him to pretend that it's somehow odd that it was picked up, and that by equating a black Democrat to the Grand Master of the KKK, he is merely trying to, quote, provoke an open and honest conversation. There's a word for that. It's trolling. That is trolling. That is acting like you're exhibiting good faith when you're actually exhibiting bad faith, right? It gets him the attention he wants. It signals kinship with the groups he wants to signal kinship with, obviously. But most of all, his refusal to even take the tiniest step backwards. A refusal to even concede that it might not have been the perfect phrasing. That's all he had to say. He could stand by the broader point. The fact that he's refusing to take even the slightest step backwards, that to me tells me that's an indication of where we are at. That the greatest sin for a certain kind of political operative is to concede in any way, shape, or form. And that makes open and honest political conversations impossible. Now, I don't want to blow this up to say this one grab is symptomatic of everything, but that to me summed up where I think political debate is at. Like, that they could not have been more careful and precise with each other, and yet they could not get over the fact that he just felt clearly that it was not in his best interest to concede even the tiniest amount in that particular discussion. Which, yeah, that to me. So do you agree with me?
I do. Yeah, it's depressing.
It is a bit. Yeah. Anyway, unless you have something else to say on that, let's move off Vivek, shall we? Okay. What are your thoughts about another update on the Trump indictment? What are your thoughts on trial date and all that kind of stuff? Any indictment thoughts generally?
I mean, I'm not any kind of legal expert to have any opinion on the timing from a legal perspective.
What about from a political perspective?
Political perspective, it seems.
Because it's staying a day before Super Tuesday.
Yes. Yeah. Helpful for Trump.
Yeah.
It would seem, based on recent prior evidence.
Yeah. I would agree with that. So what about the fact that Republicans are saying that it's politically motivated to ruin his candidacy? The fact that the trial is on the day before, starts the day before Super Tuesday.
Again, based on what we've seen so far in this cycle, it doesn't seem to hurt him at all. He seems, if anything, to get a bounce every time there's any kind of Trump legal woes in the news. So if Democrats were trying to hurt him, I don't think that timing is going to achieve it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. Because I feel like, and by the way, I cite as my evidence to agree with you the comments of other Republicans. How many times have you heard them over the last few weeks say, this is all backfiring. The mugshot is backfiring. These indictments are backfiring. He's becoming stronger than ever. I wasn't going to vote for Trump, but now I will because of these indictments, which is such a strange thing to say. I've heard that so often. And they can say, okay, well, if that's the case, then surely, you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say that every time prosecutors, which we shouldn't suggest, they keep on conflating the two. They are not the same thing. You can't say every time prosecutors take a swing at Trump, that makes him stronger. And at the same time, prosecutors taking a swing at him around Super Tuesday is trying to destroy his campaign. It's one or the other. It can't be both. In fact, I think it's neither, to be honest.
Yes. Also, there's a distinction between prosecutors and judges, because prosecutors, at least in some instances, are political figures. They are elected. They are elected for certain parties, which is crazy to me. And they do to some extent. I'm not saying that the cases are illegitimate or don't have any basis, but I think it is also reasonable to suggest that there are some political advantage. They literally, some of the Georgia prosecutors fundraising off the back of this prosecution of Trump. So you can engage in there being a political element to that, but the judge setting a trial date, the judge is independent. And so those things to me are quite different as well. And I think the idea that a judge would concern themselves with, if anything, they're going to be bending over backwards to try and not pick timing that's going to hurt Trump to not be seen to be unfair. I certainly don't think a judge is going to be considering the best way to damage Trump in a political election when picking a trial date for potential crimes.
Especially given, you got to remember, these trial dates are going to slip. They're going to the people acting like they're chiseled in stone. They're going. There's going to be motions and motions and motions, and they're going to run out of time. They're going to slip. March the 4 may end up being June or July. Yeah, and let's say the trial was set in July. I'll tell you what would happen. What would happen is the actual trial would be in October. And then you get people going, oh, hang on, this is the month before the election. Like, the fact she's saying it March the 4th might end up having it in the break between the primaries and the election, which is probably the best possible time from a political point of view to not interfere with the election. So we should just remember that.
There is also just no good time at this point
No,
in the
there
cycle
isn't.
because, like, at any point in the primary, it's going to be bad because it's going to be during a primary. Trump's almost certainly going to win the nomination. So at any point after the primary, it's going to be in the middle of a general election. That's also bad timing. And if you push it to after the election to avoid all of that, then you can argue, if you're trying to argue the case that it's hurting Trump, you say, well, they pushed it out to have this hanging over him the whole time instead of
Yes.
resolving it. So
Yeah, you're right.
there could be all this doubt. So at this point, there's no good option.
Yeah, bottom line is, if a candidate has committed multiple crimes, there is no good scenario as a
Yeah.
result of that.
Yeah.
Like, just try to commit multiple crimes. That's what I would say. That'll be my takeaway from this scenario. I know innocent till proven guilty. I'm going to make a point about that in a second. But, you get my point. the events aren't in dispute, okay? Whether it's illegal or not, it might be in dispute, but the events themselves are not in dispute. Everyone agrees what has happened. But anyway, I was just going to say that if there was any chance, I agree completely that this advantages Trump, and all the evidence suggests that. I mean, look, I could see a world. People are assuming that even if he ends up in jail, Republicans are just going to go crazy. I could see a world where if he ends up being convicted, Republicans turn off him fast. Or even in the trial. If evidence comes out in the trial or he goes on the stand and makes a mess of it, I could totally see that. I could see Republicans turning away fast. It just takes 5 or 10% of them to make all the difference. So, I'm not saying that all legal trouble is good for Trump in the primaries. What I am saying is legal trouble where Super Tuesday is the day after the trial begins, there's no downside. All there is anticipation. All there is the next 6 months of Trump saying election interference. They're attacking me because they want to attack you, and I'm getting in the way. Like there's 6 months of that, and there's no negatives until the trial starts. When the trial starts, then there may be negatives, but one day is not long enough for those negatives. So if the entire nomination is decided by day 2 of the trial, it's rigged in his favor as much as it possibly could be. Sorry, what about that?
How is any challenger to Trump expecting to get any airtime ahead of Super Tuesday when Trump's going to be on trial?
Totally. And they're saying he can't prepare for his trial. He can't prepare for his campaign. He can't campaign while he's preparing for his trial. The campaign is the trial. Like that is for him. That is he doesn't have policies. Actually, that's not true. He does have policies. He never mentions them. I will mention some of his policies soon. I won't do it today. But yeah, he doesn't have many. I'll tell you that. Like he's not campaigning on them. All he's campaigning on is that the Democrats in inverted commas are out to get him. So that is his campaign. Yeah. But, anyway, I should say, by the way, another thing about that. It's supposed to be a 4 to 6 week trial. At least according to 538, that takes in consideration that accounts for 65 to 71% of total delegates in the nomination contest in the primary. If it's a 4 to 6 week trial, so this is the entire primary essentially. This trial, if it happens, then I continue to think it will happen after. But anyway, we'll keep on pretending it's a race though, so we have something to talk about. Okay. Well, I mean, do you think that I assume that you think there's something to at least some of the charges. Do you think there's anything to the Republican argument that things are being politicized too much?
In all of these cases?
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, like because we're hearing this for everything. Is there anything that's happened where you thought, oh, yeah, that's probably a little bit politicized? I
mean, I generally agree with the argument, which I think you've made as well, that this should have been dealt with in the political setting.
Yeah.
That Trump should have been impeached in the second impeachment for January 6th and disqualified from running again. And it was it's a political issue that begged for a political solution. And that would have been the best way to handle this. Whether he's broken the law, I mean, in the documents case, almost certainly.
Yeah.
So, that one seems as close to open and shut as possible. And it's clearly breaking a law. Whether someone should go to jail for that or not, it doesn't kind of surprise me in a way that Republican voters have a strong reaction against that, in the sense that even though he's very guilty and it's bad what he did, still the idea to me of sending someone to jail over having documents, I know anyone else would, but I kind of get why Republicans think that is still an attempt to get Trump and throw him in jail for something, because people don't like January 6th, people don't like him. But I do think legally, I mean, he kind of forced them to prosecute him. He had so many opportunities to give the documents back and just was absolute pig-headed stubbornness that he didn't. And so what do you do at that point? I do think at a certain point you have to follow the law, because if you repeatedly just look the other way when someone's breaking it, it causes its own problems and sets its own very bad precedents. So that one to me is pretty obviously a slam dunk. The other ones, I mean, the New York one, as everyone says, and I agree with, is pretty crap and I don't think should have been brought. It is too much of a stretch, and there are better things to get him for. And then the two January 6 ones, to be honest, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know legally whether he has broken the law in those cases to the extent that he should be convicted. I think it's reasonable to try a case. I know there's sort of been a bit of a strategy of throw as many things at the wall as possible and see what sticks. There may be good legal reasons for that. In a political sense, would prefer that they hadn't done it that way and had just focused on the things that were the most indisputable, so that you try your best hand, and if it fails, it fails, but at least you've tried to hold someone to account. Some of the things that are a bit more of a stretch, I think, just gives fodder for Trump supporters to say, oh, look, it's illegal to tweet now, which I don't agree with, but again, is just unhelpful. I think in those instances, he's clearly behaved immorally and wrongfully politically. There's no question about that. Whether he's broken the law or not, it's hard for me to say. I think it just depends on the evidence that's presented. Some of the, these cases in America, like the RICO stuff, where it's, these quite complicated legal arguments. It's not like he's just, with the documents thing, you legally were not supposed to have these documents. You asked for them back and you went out of your way to conceal them to avoid giving them back. That's very clear, the crime that's been committed. Yes. Yeah. With the RICO thing, where it's trying to make the case, oh, you've coordinated with these people and these people have done the wrong thing, but it's part of a bigger conspiracy that you were the head of. Maybe they can prove that, maybe they can't. I just don't know at this stage.
Look, I've said enough about the legals, so I'm not going to do that. But what I will say is this. There's only been one time in at least the last few weeks, when I've thought to myself, oh, this is getting political. It's not to do with the law. It's not to do with Judge Chutkan. It's not to do with any of that. What it's to do with is the mugshot. Not the fact there was a mugshot, but I'm fine to say he gets treated like everyone else. That's fine. I don't think you should necessarily put out mugshots in the 21st century, but with the internet. But you might take them and you keep them private, like in the police station. But to the extent that they exist for everyone, I can see them saying, yeah, they exist for him as well. I'm talking about the sheer delight that the left took at the mugshot, and the dunking and the this is a humiliating moment, this kind of stuff. I've got to put a few disclaimers in this. The first of which is that I am aware that the right were doing more, just as much, if not more. All around, there was just so much hoopla and hype around the mugshot. I mentioned last week, though, about how I found it kind of annoying in the news channel at the ABC, just how everyone's hanging on this mugshot. Oh, is the mugshot out yet? Is the mugshot out yet? It's just his face. Why are you getting so excited about it? But anyway, but just the obvious the difference between the right and the left on this is that the right are representing the person who is being charged. The left ostensibly are representing the rule of law in this case. And it doesn't behove the rule of law to get excited about mugshots. Right? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I know some dude in the news channel is not the Department of Justice. Yeah, like, and Biden himself was pretty restrained. Like, he was a bit of a smart aleck, but he was relatively restrained. He didn't say much. Like, he put out this fairly low key, once again, little smart assy little call for funding at one point in time on Twitter. But just anyone else would have gone a lot further than he did. To be fair, but generally speaking, the people who supposedly who are acting like they care about the rule of law were doing a lot of dunking, and I think it's not hard to see how someone on the other side of that would go, well, you're just relishing this. This isn't about applying the laws where they fall. This is about enjoying it. This is about Trump getting his just desserts. This is about showing that he's worse than anyone ever. And I know you can't get everyone on the same page on this kind of thing. I understand the way the world works, but just that to me felt political. The joy over the mugshot.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like political pundits are going to see things through a political lens, and I don't necessarily think it is inconsistent to believe in upholding the rule of law and also have a political reaction to the facts of something at the same time. You can be like, yay, my side is winning on the basis of the rule of law. But I personally don't like mugshots as a thing for ordinary people. Same with perp walks. These kind of things are designed to deliberately humiliate people. And so on principle, I'm not dunking on him for that anyway, because if I don't like it when it's some random person who's been arrested for robbing a 7-Eleven, I'm not going to get excited about it when it's Trump. Yeah,
but also I should say, and this is the innocent till proven guilty thing that I teased before, he hasn't done anything yet. Like, a mugshot is nothing. A mugshot is not humiliating. That's not true. I disagree with you if you say a mugshot's not what you just said there. They're designed to humiliate. But the fact you have a mugshot is not a negative on your record, as far as I'm concerned. It's not a stain on your record. It's not a humiliation. It's not a negative. What's a negative and a humiliation and stain is a conviction. You are innocent until proven guilty. All because you have a mugshot means that just means someone charged you, not that you're going to be convicted. Yeah. And I think it really, really, once again, I'll use the word behove, that's taking time serious. It behoves people to remember that. That if you genuinely believe in the rule of law, nothing just happened. And nothing is going to happen until after the trial. So anyway, I've done my little law dance now. I can move on. I had an Elon update for you as well. I'm going to move that towards the end. Let's get into the Supreme Court special.
Ooh. Right after I've said I'm not an expert in legal things.
I was thinking of mentioning it at the time, but I thought, you might not like it if I say that. So it was definitely a joke that was set up at that perfect moment. But before we do that, very quick. Stats Nugget! Woo! This is a one-liner. This is just, I don't even know if this is true. I just saw it in an article and I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. It was a David Brooks article in The Atlantic, which I would actually recommend. I'm not normally a David Brooks fan, but this was an absolute doozy. Unfortunately, I'll put the link in. But I think it's going to be paywalled. Unfortunately, The Atlantic is annoying like that.
Okay, you have to read it to us.
I'll put the link. If you go on Facebook, if you ask me in Facebook, in the comments on Facebook, the Atlantic article might find itself pasted in one of the comments. It's a good article. Okay, and anyway, there was just a random stat, and I thought, wow, that's a good one. Tell me what you think of this one, Melina. Tell me how you react to this. This comes to us from Ryan Streeter, the Director of Domestic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a right-wing organisation, but I think they're a reasonable. I don't think they're particularly biased, so I believe it. Lonely young people are 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. Oh, that's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts off the top of your head on that one?
It's probably partly a reflection of people who spend a lot of time online versus people who spend more time in the world interacting with people in a day-to-day sense.
I think it's probably true.
Because most of those people are probably not going to party meetings and doing active things. They're probably engaging in politics by being on Twitter or arguing with people in comment sections. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a fair observation. I reckon there's a bit of chicken and egg as well. Like in that, I think it works both ways. I think I can see how engaging in these pursuits that you've just described could make you lonely. Like, spending your life online arguing in comment sections, that's an isolating, alienating experience that could make you lonely. But I could also see how politics would be attractive to a lonely person.
You feel like you're a part of something.
Exactly. Something bigger. Yeah. And and you belong somewhere. And also just allows you to make a positive contribution to the world when you feel like you're just drifting and you've got no roots. Yeah. So I could see it working both ways. It rings true to me, but it's not something I'd ever thought of until I read that there. So, interesting one. There we go. That's Nugget. Okay, now, Supreme Court. There's a lot here. I don't even know how to structure this. All right, there's a few sections. Right, first of all, the Supreme Court approval at the moment is the lowest that Gallup has stats for at the moment. I think they've been doing polls on the Supreme Court at least for this century. And the approval's at 40% at the moment. I'll put the graph up there. But if you can see that if you're watching the video, if not, I'll put it in the link. I'll put a link in the blurb. You can see that it's been 41% many times before. So it's not like it's a huge outlier, but it is the lowest it's been, at least this century. Either way, not real popular at the moment, Supreme Court. I'm assuming that's related to Dobbs, because it went down dramatically last year when Dobbs happened. But I want to look at the last year or so on the court and see what we think of it. So I want to go through a quick summary of the last year. I've told you this, so I'm going to go case by case, or sort of topic by topic, and see what your thoughts are. Basically want to rate these on, number one, do we think it's a reasonable kind of area ruling, and just how hackish might it be? We're trying to see if they're a bunch of hacks or not. Okay, so because the left are very much making out like they're a bunch of hacks at this point in time. All right, let's go. Affirmative action is probably the biggest decision that the Supreme Court's had in the last year, other than after Dobbs, that angered the left. In terms of the things that the left mention when they're angry at the Supreme Court, affirmative action comes straight after Dobbs, usually. This was Students for Fair Admissions versus President Fellows of Harvard College, and also Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina. The Supreme Court struck down the college's ability to engage in racial discrimination in the name of affirmative action. You can still theoretically interview people, and you can ask them about the adversity they've overcome, and they can talk about their race and the issues of their race, but you just can't just go, well, you're black, therefore you get 4 points. You can't make that a category on its own. It needs to be part of something else that you consider, essentially. That was along partisan lines. So I can see why the Democrats weren't happy with it. 6-3 along partisan lines. The public agreed with that, though, 69% to 31%. The public are not a fan of affirmative action generally. So what are your thoughts about that ruling?
Well, in terms of the polling, my understanding is with affirmative action, the results in polls varies a lot across polls depending on how the question is phrased. And I saw one that was saying a majority of people opposing affirmative action in a general sense, but there was an Associated Press poll in May saying that 60% of people said the court shouldn't prohibit it. So I think it's one of those things it's hard to look at a particular poll and say the public think this on this issue, because I think that the reason you get so much variance is that in a vacuum, if you say, should one race get preferenced over another, people are most often inclined to say no, because I think it's pretty uncontroversial. I would say most people would agree with the idea that what we want is a level playing field. That's the goal. Yeah. For everyone to be on a level playing field. And where you get differences is, do we have a level playing field right now? And if not, how do we make it level? And so opponents of affirmative action would say you're unfairly advantaging people of color with these policies. And so it's not a level playing field. So we need to get back to not having these preferences. But people in favor of affirmative action would argue there's still disproportionate rates. People of color are still disproportionately less likely to go to college. And that's because of these historical factors. And we still need to do work to increase the access. And so therefore you need these policies in place. Otherwise it's not going to happen. So those policies are about leveling a playing field that isn't level. And so I think that's why it just depends so much on how a question is asked as to how people feel about it. But yeah, in terms of the ruling itself, I don't like it. Because as I say, I just think it will increase inequality in the short term. I think there are ways, like colleges are obviously not just going to be like, oh, well, too bad, no more black people in college. They're going to find other ways of doing things. But generally in the parts of California banned affirmative action decades ago, and they still haven't caught up to where they were before that decision. So it does make it a lot harder, and it is going to be a backward step for a problem that's already way worse than it should be. It did make me think that you mentioned that you're still allowed to put in your application, talk about the way race affected you. And that was kind of an interesting point in the process in this case for me, because I had been thinking before that, God, I was thinking particularly about Ketanji Brown Jackson and thinking, God, it must suck to get confirmed to the Supreme Court for the rest of your life when you've got presumably decades left to live and you're in a 6'3" minority. Yeah. What a pointless job that you have to do for the rest of your life. Like that would suck so bad. And I've realized that that's wrong. First of all, because there have been a number of rulings that were neither unanimous nor 6-3, which we'll get to, where some of the conservative justices have joined with the liberals. So in that sense, more relevant than maybe I would have predicted. But also, this was an interesting case to me where if you're in a minority as a justice, you can still have a positive impact even in a case that you lose, because that came out of the fact that she asked when they were having the arguments in the court, or if we throw out affirmative action, does that mean an applicant to a college isn't allowed to mention their race in an application at all? Are they banned in their personal essay from mentioning the race that they happen to be, even if it's relevant? And the conservative justices were like, well, no, we're not saying you're banned from mentioning your race, so yes, you still can. And that opens the door for colleges to at least have some mechanism to consider it. So that's a way in which, even though she's lost, she's managed to positively impact, from my perspective at least, the outcome of that case. So it's just a little lesson for me that there's always ways to make things better.
I think that's true. And I think that you only need to look at the legacy that Scalia's had on the court over the last 10 years. Many of their arguments were originally devised by Scalia when he was in the minority. If you are a clear legal thinker, I think you can set up the next majority, even from a position of the minority. So yeah, I think a lot of people have suggested that Elena Kagan might be doing that right now. So I don't think it's a bum job. Don't feel sorry for them.
Yeah, I mean, she can obviously quit if she hates it. I'm sure that she likes it more than I would. But I was just trying to think through intellectually why anyone would want to do it. So that was my answer that I came to.
Fair enough. I know you're not going to want to weigh in too much on the legal technicalities of any particular decision. I understand I'm not a lawyer, But do you have any instinct about the hack score on that particular ruling? Because you can disagree with it from a policy point of view.
Yeah.
While thinking, I understand the basic logic that they're running with. Like, what do you think it was a hack decision, or do you think it was just a fair enough conservative decision?
I'm interested in your thoughts. I didn't go in too much into the legal weeds with this one, but the thing which does stick out to me that makes me query a degree of hackishness is the fact that they made an exemption for military academies. Yeah. Because it was supposedly in national security interest to have affirmative action for people of color in the military. So I just think if you can make a case that it is important from a societal perspective in one field that conservatives happen to like, I don't understand how it's consistent to ban it in a context that's maybe perceived as more liberal.
I'm not going to want to get too much into the legal weeds on this myself, because we were trying to, I wouldn't say race, but we got plenty of cases to go through. All I would say is I have talked about this on the podcast last year, like when this happened, but when this was coming. But I would say that I thought that some of the reasoning that was used was a bit suspect, to be honest. But I think there was a case that could be made for it. I don't think it was an impossible case to make. So I would say that my hack score would be existent but not high. I would say that's what I would say. Like if it was out of 10, I'd give it a 4 out of 10 on the hack scale. So 3 to 4, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm not going to be that specific. But one thing I would say is people who are generally interested in this area, the most recent series of the Slate Slow Burn podcast looked at Clarence Thomas and his history and his relationship to the idea of affirmative action, which goes back many decades, which was really interesting. I finished it recently. It's only like 4 episodes, so it's pretty manageable. And they looked at how he had been a beneficiary of affirmative action, and he got into college, into Harvard, and had the perception when he was there, Harvard or Yale? I've forgotten. Anyway, one of those. And he had the feeling when he was there that the liberals on campus were treating him as not deserving of being there because he was black. He'd only gotten in there because he was black, which I obviously don't think is true. No. But, and as I've already stated, I think there are good reasons why it's addressing the fact that he wouldn't have gotten in there despite his merit, not the other way around. But he clearly had a very powerful impact on him. He felt very humiliated by it, which is a really powerful emotion that I think motivates a lot of strong behavior in the world. And he made the argument in his autobiography that he came from Georgia and then like deep South during segregation, lots of racism. And he kind of ultimately came to the conclusion that the overt racists in the deep South were less pernicious than the liberals who are not overtly racist but have this more subtle racism, the racism of low expectations or things of that nature. And I definitely agree with him that the thing he's describing amongst liberals is real and is racism, and I wouldn't quarrel with that. And I would accept the argument that it's maybe even as bad. I certainly would not say it's worse than people who go around like banning black people from diners or advocating for lynching or banning interracial marriage. Like, I understand why he found that an upsetting situation, but I don't agree with his conclusions. Sure. But it did ingrain in him a deep hostility to the idea of affirmative action. And so it's a long-held cause for him to try and dismantle it. And it just goes, the podcast goes into a lot of interesting detail about that. The other thing that does come out of it that, again, interested me, and I think is just relevant in the sense of, you know, this idea that there's more opposition to affirmative action that benefits people who actually need that extra support to be level with people who are born to privilege. Clarence Thomas is also very anti-welfare. He threw his own sister under the bus in the national media when he was a rising star in conservative politics, just trashed her for being on welfare, even though she, unlike he and his brother had been sent to live with his grandfather growing up, who was a more stable home life in a nicer part of town than his mum. His sister stayed with his mum. So he had advantages his sister didn't have in life, and she ended up on welfare, and he basically said she was terrible for that in the national media. But interestingly, the house that his grandfather built with his own hands and raised him to be this very proud black man, to be very resistant to accepting anything from the state and to kind of stand on your own 2 feet and all these things of this nature, is now owned by a very rich white man who's letting Clarence Thomas's mum live there for free.
That one. Okay, we're getting to that.
We'll
come back to that.
Which is just to say, you know, to me, I don't think it's better to accept gifts from wealthy billionaires that very few people get access to than it is to accept money or advantages from the government that like are specifically designed to address historic disadvantage. And that's just me.
That's a good call. I reckon let's move on. I will just say, just so people know, that I have talked about it before, that my personal view on affirmative action at universities is different to yours. I'm more concerned about socioeconomic advancement than racial advancement. Like, I think there's a lot of overlap between socioeconomic issues and racial issues, but I'm not interested in helping someone who is rich and black. Like but having said that, I don't want to get into it because you made your case perfectly, and people have heard enough from me. Let's talk about the voting rights cases. There's Allen versus Milligan, which is where the Supreme Court ruled in favor of redistricting Alabama, which until now only had one what they call majority minority district, which is it's districted so that basically has a majority of black people in it, and the population of Alabama would suggest that there should be two districts that have a majority minority because there are that many black people, and the Voting Rights Act specifically says that they're supposed to apportion according to allow minorities to have majority minority districts. And the Republicans, basically gerrymandered it so there was only going to be one majority minority district. And the question was, in Allen versus Milligan, can they be forced to redistrict so there's two majority minority districts, which is what the Voting Rights Act would suggest. And I was astonished that the Supreme Court ruled in favour of that. And the reason I was astonished about that was because John Roberts has made his cause for the past 30 years, long before he was a Supreme Court Justice, to chip away at the Voting Rights Act along the lines of racism is over. We don't need to worry about this anymore. And he personally joined the Liberals so that, along with Kavanaugh, to make it 5-4 in favour of the Liberals, so that Alabama was forced to redistrict a second majority minority district. By the way, they have since refused to do that. They openly defying the Supreme Court. That's another story on its own that I'll talk to Elle about on Friday, because in my funny state business section that's coming up. But for the court case alone, let's just talk about that. As far as polling goes, and all these polling might be wrong for the reasons that you just said before. That was a great point you made, by the way. The polling I found had public supporting the Supreme Court in this 53-47, which was a depressingly even split when you're talking about just fairness in drawing districts. I was astonished by that one. Do you have any thoughts about Allen versus Milligan? That's definitely not a hacky ruling, I'll tell you that.
No, it's not. I was surprised by it as well. Yeah.
That's fine. There's another one in the voting rights area, which you may have more to say about, which is Moore versus Harper. This was a real big one. This was possibly, in my view, this was their biggest ruling. This was about the so-called independent state legislature theory. And the theory was that what was being decided here was, do state legislatures have the right to make election laws that are unreviewable by state courts? Because the Supreme Court most definitely is not going to be reviewing them. The federal Supreme Court is not going to be reviewing a state decision. But the question was whether state legislatures rule supreme, because I'm not going to go into the legals on this, like about the particular clauses of the Constitution that they're relying on. But yeah, it's pretty dubious stuff, let's just say. The idea, just the concept is insane, that there would be an unreviewable law affecting elections, because then obviously you can rig your own re-election.
Yes.
like if it's unreviewable, like you can go, okay, we are the party of, we are the three-eyed people party, and we will pass a law that only three-eyed people can vote. Review that. And so it's just, it would just be the end of democracy if that happened. It really would. That sounds like an over-the-top statement. It's not. That was the independent state legislature theory, is what John Eastman was advocating for future elections, like to basically rig elections. And I was so relieved that it was decided 6-3. I can't believe that three. I can believe it, but that's the hack quota. That three Republican or three conservative judges ruled against it, or ruled against this ruling. But Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett all joined the Libs to knock down the independent state legislature theory, which was beautiful. Once again, depressing polling, only 55-45. In favour of democracy. Anyway. So
I wonder how much, in terms of the polling, people are engaged in the particulars of that issue, because it's kind of a strange one. And this, to me, it's obviously a sensible ruling on a very fringe thing. I do wonder because, part of the sort of thing about the Supreme Court is that they're able to choose the cases that they rule on. And you could make the argument that it's a sign of how conservative the court is that they even heard this case rather than throwing it out off the bat. Although I do wonder as well whether there was a degree of interest in actively knocking it down at that level because it is so extreme. I mean, it's a very fringe argument and it's kind of a little bit alarming that it got as far as it did. And even with 3 justices voting in favor, because as you say, it's literally saying no checks and balances, which is supposed to be the whole way that the American system of government at every level is set up. Checks and balances, checks and balances. So yeah, I agree with you. It would have been very bad if it had gotten through, and it's a relief it didn't, but it's also a bit peculiar.
By the way, just to be clear, the 3I voter rule I posited, you wouldn't be able to do that. There are other reasons you couldn't do that. Okay, but just my point still stands.
Yeah,
like allowing a state legislature to pass a law involving any election, whether it's a presidential election or whatever, that is unreviewable, is just so bad.
I mean, look at how gerrymandered some of the states are already, and that's without this extra power that they would have gotten. So it would have been bad.
Okay, so anyway, so that definitely wasn't very hackish. Yes. Zero on the hack score there. Immigration in the United States versus Texas, an 8-1 majority ruled that Texas and Louisiana had lacked standing to challenge Biden's immigration enforcement policy. When you talk about standing, that's the idea that you need to have some. You need to have some kind of skin in the game in order to sue someone. You can't some random person can't just sue for no reason. You need to be materially affected by the situation in order to sue over it. And yeah, you could see the argument made by Texas saying, yeah, we are affected by illegal immigration. But the Supreme Court said no. And that is consistent with a lot of rulings from the Supreme Court that were loath to mess around with immigration laws because they feel like that is kind of the prerogative of the president of the federal government and the president in particular.
Because I suppose what would get tricky is like Texas obviously is affected by America's immigration policy, but so are all the border states. And are you just then going to say, well, Texas gets to decide what the border policy is for the whole U.S.? Yeah. And then what if I know most of the border states are politically Republican, but if one happened to be Democrat and felt differently and was also affected, then, that is sort of a recipe for chaos. So I can see why they didn't want to set that precedent. Yeah. And
I should say, by the way, that, that's a pro-Biden decision. They are now, but it's not going to be a pro-Biden. It's not going to be a pro-Democrat decision forever because that cuts both ways. Yeah. Like the Republicans are going to be in charge and they're going to be doing more on immigration than the Democrats ever did, I assure you. and at that point in time, you're going to hear, there is going to be a court case. And the Supreme Court are going to go, no, the federal government is in control of looking after the border. And people will go, oh, you're a bunch of hacks. Just remember United States versus Texas because this lays the groundwork for that. So it's... even though it appears to be the most pro-Democrat ruling of all, 8-1 in favour of Biden, it ain't going to work out that way. So I just flagged that. Anything else on that before we move on?
I'm just surprised it hasn't happened before that Texas or another southern state has tried to sue the federal government over immigration policy.
Well, this is... I'm surprised it hasn't happened in the last few years. But remember, the partisan nature of immigration is quite recent. Like as recently as 2013, Republicans were trying to pass what they call comprehensive immigration reform, which means all the stuff for the left and the right. It's only become super partisan basically since then. Yeah. So this is quite recent. Free speech versus gay rights, the perennial on the Supreme Court the last 10 years. There was 303 Creative versus Ellenus. The court ruled that a web designer has a First Amendment right to refuse to create sites for same-sex weddings, despite a state law that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation. Their argument was, this is in Colorado. There's an Anti-Discrimination Act in Colorado. It said that it prohibits a public accommodation from denying the full and equal enjoyment of goods or services to any customer based on disability, race, creed, colour, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, national origin, or ancestry. Now, the court said it wasn't discrimination based on sexual orientation because they would happily serve the gay people in things other than weddings. Their issue was not discriminating against gay people. It was an ideological concern about, or a conscious decision about weddings, gay weddings. Now, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they obviously, there's some pretty thin slicing salami in these decisions.
Yeah.
Like where you personally stand on these, I don't even know, to be honest, because it's one of those ones where rights are in opposition to each other. Like, it's obviously rights are in opposition. Like, there are obviously free speech rights. To say to someone, I don't agree with you, I don't want to promote that thing that you want. But equally, there is obviously equal opportunity legislation as well and rights as well. And so they're in tension with each other. Where you land, I don't think there's any logic to. It's almost arbitrary in a way. Do you have any views about that particular ruling? I should say it was along partisan lines. It was a 6-3 along partisan lines.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really agree with the distinction of it's not discrimination because they would make other kinds of websites for them in the same way that, we don't consider it not discriminatory to say black people can ride the bus, but they have to sit at the back. To me, it's kind of comparable to that. You're treating them as a second-class citizen. It is clearly discriminatory. Yeah. So I don't agree with that part of the ruling. The technicality of, I agree with you that you have two rights coming up against each other and that like her rights, the web designer's rights, are being infringed by forcing her to publish something she doesn't want to publish. Having said that, like, she would, as a web designer, presumably publish lots of things that she doesn't explicitly agree with. And from a technical legal perspective, it does get to this difficult point where you're trying to draw a line somewhere. And obviously the famous example previously was the wedding cake. Is it expression when you make a wedding cake? And the courts have in the past ruled, no, you have to bake the wedding cake for the gay couple. And that's probably equally objectionable to the homophobic cake maker as it is to the homophobic web designer. People were making the argument that the web designer is offering templates. She's not having to like personally write, I such and such love gay marriage. So to me, like, that's not where I would draw the line, but I do understand it's difficult. I don't know if this means the Supreme Court's going to have to keep hearing these cases for every profession that is like in any way conceivably related to weddings and involving any form of creative expression, like a florist's using their speech when they do a flower arrangement or not. It seems difficult because they seem to have tried to rule in a narrow way on this, but I think that means that the actual line is still ambiguous. But to me, in this instance, like, if someone is providing her with a copy and she's just providing them with a template, I don't think that her free speech rights are being so meaningfully impinged upon. She's being forced to serve someone she doesn't like, but that is kind of the principle of all anti-discrimination law. And so in that sense, I don't think it's a significant enough free speech violation that other people's rights to not be discriminated against should be overridden. But clearly the court doesn't agree.
I don't know what my hack score on this one is. I don't really. I would say for me, it's all quicksand. It's all really slippery. I think my gut instinct is quite similar to yours on this. Like, I think that you got to balance the impingement on your speech versus the impingement on someone. I mean, someone from the other side could say, well, you can just go to the store down the road. Like, it's not like it's not like it's difficult for you to get your service. Like, like there are plenty of people who are happy to do it. So, I mean, I understand that both sides would say, it's not really infringing on you much at all. And well, that's the nature of these court cases, I guess.
That is the other thing that's weird about this case, that no one has actually asked her to make a website for their gay wedding. There's a preemptive lawsuit where the person who runs this business is saying, I would like to start making websites for weddings, and I am afraid I might get sued by a gay couple, so I'm going to take this to the Supreme Court, which is a bit unusual in terms of whether there's a little bit of an open question about whether that counts as standing to bring that preemptively.
That's a great point. Well done.
The Supreme Court didn't agree again.
Look, to me, I feel like this is, if there's a spectrum between technical expertise versus creative expression, I think this is too far along the spectrum towards technical expertise. But, whatever. I'm not in the Supreme Court, but I mean, at the very least, we can see the argument. But you at home can make your own hack score on that one. Indian rights. The court upheld the Indian Child Welfare Act, a 1978 law that seeks to keep Native American children with their tribes and preserve their heritage. That sounds a little on the left to me. 7-2 from the court. Roberts, Kavanagh, Gorsuch and Barrett joined the Libs. The interesting one there is Gorsuch. He's really into Indian welfare. I don't know why that is, but
it's because he served on a court that I think I did not prepare this, sir, but I think that he served on a court in an area that dealt with a lot of these cases, and so he gained like an above average understanding of the issues around Native American law and customs and things of that nature.
When he has actual life experience with something.
Interesting,
he's
isn't
not conservative anymore.
Interesting.
Yes, it is interesting. Yes. Anyway, and there's another 50-50 one from the public, 53-47. Yeah, okay. Well, that's obviously not doesn't have much of a hack score. Medicaid, Health and Hospital Corporation versus Talevsky. This is a conceivably big one, a big ruling if it had gone the other way. They could have destroyed the entire Medicaid program. Medicaid is a conditional grant program, which means that you get the money in return for you performing certain acts. But the way that's enforced is through lawsuits. So, for instance, let's say you're Arkansas, and they say you get this big slice of money as long as you allow poor people to get cancer treatment. And then someone doesn't provide cancer treatment to a poor person then sues to get it, to enforce that, right? That's how it's it's not the perfect system, but that's how it's meant to work. Now, they say that's how it did work until Talevsky. The Talevsky case was about whether those private lawsuits should be even allowed. And if they weren't, then there'll be literally no way of enforcing these conditions, which means the states would stop observing those conditions and then Medicaid would wither on the vine. So that's why this essentially was a ruling over the future of Medicaid. Conservatives theoretically don't like Medicaid, so this could be a way they could have killed it if they wanted to. In 2015, John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Alito, and Scalia all said, yes, these lawsuits should not be allowed. But they were in the minority at that point in time. Now, Roberts would be in the majority, and so would Thomas and Alito. It went 7-2 against the Conservatives. So Kavanagh, Barrett, and Gorsuch all voted to save Medicaid, as well as Roberts. Roberts changed his mind.
Did he say why?
I don't know. He might have, but I didn't read it. So I'd be curious on that as well. Yeah.
Is this the same case or the same arguments?
Same arguments, different case. Yeah. So like it's a new case, but it was basically just the same thing. Like they tried it on again. Yeah. Yeah. Now they had the Conservative Court, and the Conservative Court slapped it down 7-2. As a little aside, by the way, while we're talking about hack scores, I can't help noticing that Alito and Thomas are always on the same side, and it's never on the bipartisan one. I'll tell you that. But anyway, we'll get to them. Environment. Sackett versus EPA. The court ruled that the Clean Water Act does not allow the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate wetlands near bodies of water unless they have a continuous surface connection to those waters. The issue was, swamps and stuff, which sometimes are dry. Like, if you're going to be governed by the Clean Water Act, it should be like a lake or something where there's a continuous, like it's not just someone's reservoir or something. And literally, sometimes the issue is about reservoir. The court ruled against the EPA there, saying that they needed to have continuous connection. So that's basically watering down, so to speak, the Clean Water Act as it had been interpreted until then. Kavanagh was in the minority. He went with the Libs, but he lost. And the public was 72-28 against that ruling. So they like water protections. Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
No,
That's okay. All right. Look, in summary, that's a fair. It's not every case, but it's a fair few cases. In summary, you might have seen a pattern. Kavanaugh is the swinger, as many people predicted he might be in a different context a few years back. Yeah, a lot of experience being the swinger, but now he's a swinging judge. He's joining the libs a lot, and we basically got a swinging block now of Roberts and Kavanaugh, and I don't think that they're hackish at all. Like, I mean, they're conservative, but I'm not saying that liberal, but I think that they've shown a lot of independence, especially Kavanaugh. Also in Cruz versus Arizona, they permitted a prisoner to challenge his conviction in federal court after the law changed a bit. Once again, they joined the libs 5-4 again. Kavanaugh was in the majority 96% of the time. And Roberts was in the majority 95% of the time. I think that they are the two pivotal judges, which is not what people expected, I think. In fact, even when Kavanaugh joins with the conservatives, he has this interesting habit of writing concurrences, which is a different way of interpreting the majority position, which waters down the majority position. He intentionally narrows down their rulings in a way that I don't think Clarence Thomas would enjoy very much. Given that he's a swinging judge, and people know that if they bring this case to the court, he will rule against them if they defy his concurrence. So really, he's undermining the majority. He's seen the rule himself as a majority of one, essentially, which is a really interesting development. It's not like he doesn't know he's doing that either. He did it with Dobbs. That's a big case to be doing that with, and he did it with the guns case as well. Like, he's doing it on big cases. So ironically, given I know theoretically the Democrats weren't against him because of his ideology. They were against him because of his sexual practices in the past. But hey, call me cynical. I think it was because of his ideology, and I think that they ended up with the best judge they could possibly have expected under Trump. I really do. I really do. Like, I think that he's a conservative, but he ain't Alito, I'll tell you that. And also Barrett as well is not far behind, Since she's joined the court, her and Kavanaugh have not joined Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch to push a case through on the emergency docket, which is when you see a case really, really quickly rather than letting it go through. 13 times. That's a lot. Anyway, so my takeaway from that. Well, what's your takeaway first? I've talked a lot.
I think in some ways, I would be definitely lying if I said I predicted this in hindsight. But thinking about it since sort of seeing the result, especially this time, I think it kind of makes sense in a way that they're not a monolith, because it feels like they will be the way the Federalist Society has over a long time now tried to craft this pipeline of judges that all believe the same thing and going to push the same causes in these sort of broad political terms. But for starters, within a political party, there's always disagreement anyway. Even if people are on the same side, people disagree on the particulars. Also, at least in theory, we're talking about specific legal questions, not broad political policy questions. So people can have, and things end up in the Supreme Court in the first place because they're contested. So people can have, it's not always necessarily so obvious if you're following the law what is the right decision in a left-right binary. And also, judges have every incentive coming up in the pipeline to shape themselves publicly in this Federalist Society mold to maximize their chances of being confirmed. But if they make it to the Supreme Court, no one can do anything. So obviously they're all going to make themselves sound very samey up to a certain point. But that's not necessarily their actual view. And they have literally no comeuppance if they turn out to be different once they're on the court. So we might end up seeing more of this on the conservative side in the future if we narrow the rules of what you're allowed to have said to be nominated in the first place. It might more often be the case that those might not actually reflect their actual views, and we'll only find out later. And also, I mean, you look at someone like Kavanaugh. He's made himself one of the, if not the most powerful person on the court. If you're the swinger, and as you say, like, not just like being a swing voter, but also putting these opinions out that set the terms of the decision as well, you make yourself a player. And a lot of people like being that guy.
You make a really good point, which I hadn't thought before, about, you're right, having all these conditions to campaign to be a justice. It's created a situation where conservatives have no idea who are true believers and who aren't.
Yeah.
And they have no way of enforcing it. Like, it's a really perverse outcome for them. Like, they got no idea when these guys and it's probably going to just become worse and worse for them. Like, these people
because people will know.
Yeah. So people at lower courts are probably just going to become more and more extreme. And we've got one of them coming up. And then maybe when they get to the Supreme Court, all of a sudden they just change on a dime because they were just playing them the whole time. Which is really a really interesting development. That's a great pickup. Look, for me, my main takeaway here, as much as anything, is that it's not just the moderation, but it's also the things that, not moderation, that's the wrong word. It's not just their surprising independence, but it's also just the amount that Barrett and Kavanaugh in particular have slapped Trump down. They've slapped him down a lot. Like, they slapped down all his attempts to steal the 2020 election. They slapped down the independent state legislature theory, which was their pet theory that they were running for the future. They've been skeptical of Texas law trying to force platforming of conservatives on social media, which is another pet cause. And the Supreme Court said, nah. They've allowed bond practice immigration, like we said. They've allowed sanctuary cities. They came up, no problems with them. Trump would call these people very disloyal. He really would. And lately Trump's been calling for the Supreme Court to overturn his indictments. That's not going to happen. and there are going to be lots of appeals going to the Supreme Court in the near future for Trump, right? Trying to delay or to eliminate his trials. Like, he's going to go to the Supreme Court every time he can because he's got the money to do it. He's got the donations to do it. And he's going to think that his people are going to look after him. And I don't think they are. I really don't.
Well, again, why would they? Because they are literally the only people in America who will face no punishment in a practical sense for going against him. Yeah. Anyone else will be hounded out of office, or if they're, an everyday person denied advancement in their job or harassed in a way. I mean, Supreme Court justices can get harassed, but they also have, I assume, security protection. But if you're a Supreme Court justice, you are doing the job that you are going to do for the rest of your life. And I'm sure it's not nice to be hated by public figures, but also, I mean, you're going to be hated either way when you're in the Supreme Court, because the left will hate you if you do whatever Trump says. And I don't think they would want to be defined by history as Trump judges. So they have every incentive to demonstrate their independence if they're looking at their personal integrity and sense of self, but also their place in history. It doesn't mean that I don't think that they would then go out of their way to stick their thumb in his eye if it wasn't legally sound. But I just don't think they have any reason to be hacks supporting him in causes if they aren't legally sound, because why would they? He can't hurt them.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And I also say that if you're ideological, which a lot of intelligent people are, whether they're ideologically left or right, they're ideological. Trump's got nothing to do with that.
No.
like if you care about some particular cause, whether Trump goes to jail or not, it's got nothing to do with that cause.
Yeah.
So
and even politically, Trump isn't a conservative in the normal sense of the term. Yeah. Trump is Trump. He's got his own ideologies. So people who have grown up with traditional conservatism, I suspect if you put them in a lie detector, the majority of conservative politicians would say they don't like and don't agree with Trump.
Yeah.
They're just all beholden to him, so they have to go along with him. So
these guys don't.
No, why would they?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And so my prediction is that should Trump win the election, it's going to come down to Kavanaugh, essentially. Does he pardon himself? And I think Kavanaugh's going to rule against him. And it's also going to come down to Kavanaugh. Do the state trials, do they need to be put on hold or potentially just dismissed entirely if Trump is president? because that's going to go to court. It's going to go to the Supreme Court. And I reckon Kavanaugh votes against him, and Trump has a tantrum. They made my famous last words. I may look back on that, and you might just go, you may dance on my metaphorical grave for saying that, but that's my prediction right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to go as far as to, I think you could be right, but I'm not going to go as far to agree and say I predict that will happen, in the sense that I think that you can make a non-hackish argument, if you're so inclined, that a president should be allowed to pardon himself, because otherwise he's unpardonable, and that's weird. And or, you should put a case on hold, because there generally is a principle that presidents shouldn't be having to deal with legal things while they're president. And so I'm not saying that's my position, but I'm just saying, like, I think that they could credibly make that argument if they want to. They could justify that to themselves without looking like they're just kind of being loyal to Trump in a overtly hackish way that has no legal grounding. I'm, again, not an expert.
No, neither am I.
But yeah, I kind of wouldn't be surprised either way, and I think it would come down to the legal arguments. I don't think they'll do it because they feel loyal to him.
No.
That's for sure.
Fair enough, okay. Let me ask you one more question. I was quite disparaging about Alito and Thomas a second ago. In fact, they always vote as a unit, and it's always against the Liberals. But one could just as easily say, how about the three Liberals? How about them? They're always voting in opposition to Thomas and Alito. Aren't they hacks? How come only right-wingers are hacks in your world, Chaz? Why? Well, what happened to left-wing hacks who are just always voting on the Democrat side? What would be your response to that?
Well, we've had this conversation.
We have. We've had this
and
offline.
I agreed with the point you made, so you make the point.
You want me to make it? Okay. All right. The point I made to Melina offline, you've just destroyed the illusion.
When I accused you of being a left-wing hack.
The argument I made is that the Supreme Court hears cases that are chosen by the majority. So the cases don't end up in front of the Supreme Court unless they are something that are going to advance the agenda of the conservative majority at this point in time, which means that it is extremely unlikely that something's going to come up that's going to split people who have a different view of the law. It totally could split the majority view of the law because there's different kinds of conservative, right? But it's no surprise that the minority, and I'm not talking about left here, whoever the minority are, it's no surprise that they find themselves on the wrong end of the cases that are chosen. And so what a surprise they end up in the minority as a group all the time. And yeah, for me, that goes with that's the case as well. If it's a conservative minority versus a left-wing majority, I would expect the conservative minority to vote as a unit. In fact, that's exactly what we're seeing. Like in the past, we saw the same judges who are now split voting, well, not Barrett because she's new, but Kavanaugh didn't show nearly this much independence when it wasn't so clear that the cases that were coming up were conservative. Like they then voted as a unit because they had no control over the cases. And so they were things that were there because they were different to what the left... sorry, let me put this again. The cases now are cases that are coming up because in the past they weren't likely to win. When there was a left-wing majority, or at least it was 50-50, these cases were unlikely to be successful then. So the cases were not brought by parties until they thought they could win with it. So and then the Conservatives have to choose them. So it's all rigged so that the cases that come up are going to be exactly the things that the Liberals would be likely to disapprove of without even being hacks, just from their judicial views. So that's the reason I think it's unfair to expect the Liberals to split in the way that I think if Conservatives are being intellectually honest when they have the majority, they would split. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense.
It does, yes.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with that. That's why I made you say it again.
Okay, all right. So should we talk about this Mark Tushnet thing or not? I flagged an article to you that was just appalling. Maybe it's just a waste of time. What do you reckon? Do you want to talk about it?
You mentioned it quickly. Yeah, I don't mind.
Let's just leave it for now
Right.
because it's... Oh, look. Okay, now I'll just say it very, very quickly. I was going to do a rave about it, but let's just do it very quickly. I'll put it in if you're interested, I'll put it in the blurb underneath the videos. Despite the fact, okay, I am not a lawyer, even though I have a law degree. I am not an expert on the constitutional law in America, as much as I pretend I am. There are people who I would call hacks, who have much more knowledge than I do, and so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's easy for me in Australia to sit back and go, yeah, they're not so bad. Liberals disagree. Okay, Liberals are really, really upset about these guys. And Mark Tushnet is a Harvard law professor who knows a lot more about law than I do. A lot more about law than I do. He's particularly upset. But he wrote what, in my view, is one of the worst takes I've ever seen. Even in this period of op-ed writing, which was, you can see it for yourself. By the way, I read news.com.au. I see some terrible takes, but this is worse than any of those takes as far as I'm concerned. He wrote, I'm going to quote him, "We urge President Biden to restrain MAGA justices immediately by announcing that if and when they issue rulings that are based on gravely mistaken interpretations of the Constitution that undermine our most fundamental commitments, the administration will be guided by its own constitutional interpretations." Now you might go, hang on. Is he suggesting Biden just does whatever he likes and just ignores the Supreme Court? No, he's not suggesting he acts like a dictator. No, he's very careful to define which rulings Biden should ignore. We do not believe President Biden should simply ignore every MAGA ruling. What's a MAGA ruling? The president should act when MAGA justices issue high-stakes rulings that are based on gravely mistaken constitutional interpretations, and when presidential action predicated on his administration's constitutional interpretations would substantially mitigate the damage posed by the ruling in question. Oh, so he only ignores the Supreme Court when he thinks they're very wrong and he thinks the issue is important. Wow, that really narrows it down. We're talking about the MAGA rulings. Do you think John Roberts is MAGA? I mean, what's he talking about? Anyway, I think that's an appalling piece. And I think if the Democrats did that, they would regret it.
Yeah, I mean, they won't ever.
Yeah, no, they won't. But they would regret it because, like I just said, the Supreme Court is literally the only thing standing between a second Trump administration and disaster. And you mess with their legitimacy at your peril, I would suggest. Do you have anything to add to that?
No.
That's a shocker. Anyway, I did that quick. I'm glad to say that. All right, so there are two other things. In fact, there are three other areas in the Supreme Court. We're not going to get through all of them. But I want to first of all talk about, there are two cases that are before the court. One which is I think an interesting guns case. There's an interesting abortion pill case, which I think also presages the ghost of Supreme Court future. There's a real dubious judge out there. And there's also the ethics issues about Supreme Court. What would your favourite to do next?
Guns and pills.
Guns and pills. Okay, let's do that. Okay. They're my favourite combination. Do we do guns first or do you want to do pills first? Because you're doing pills.
Let's do guns first.
Okay, all right.
In front of me.
Okay, good. All right, okay, I'll go guns first. So, all right, it's a big issue coming up. To buy a gun, you usually need, you need to be a legal adult. You need to undergo a background check. You need to have a clean criminal record. You need to not be under a restraining order for domestic violence. These are all good things. The gun needs to have a serial number. It must be sold by a licensed dealer. Most people don't have a problem with most of this. There are some who do. Sorry,
a few inaccuracies in that.
Oh,
but we can get to it later. But
no, jump in.
You don't need to have a clean criminal record. You can't have committed a felony. But
sorry, you're right.
Minor things.
You're right.
Also, you don't need to get a gun from a licensed dealer. You can get it secondhand from anybody. In which case, you don't need to pass a background check.
Good call. Good call. See, I was just stopping to think for a sec. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Yeah, no,
which will foreshadow a little bit some of my thoughts on this case.
Okay, good. All right, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah, no, because I was thinking about the licensed dealer thing. I was thinking about it from a license. Yeah, okay, no, fair enough. Good pickup. Thank you. I'm glad I got those corrections in there. Okay, all right. Regardless, there are regulations.
Yes.
Okay, when you're buying a gun. Okay, now most people don't have a problem with those regulations, but now you can buy what they call ghost guns. Okay. What a ghost gun is like a kit where you make the gun instead. But you're not like smelting iron or something. Like it's an almost finished gun. You need to just put finishing touches on, essentially. They cost about $500. It takes, well, theoretically 20 minutes. It would probably take me 10 hours. But theoretically, there are instructional videos on YouTube that you follow, and they take 20 minutes to half an hour, or whatever, to finish off your gun. Until recently, they weren't defined as firearms. So for that reason, they would not be subject to firearms regulations, which are the ones which I read out that were accurate and inaccurate. Now, they're not a huge problem so far, these ghost guns. It's kind of a new kind of thing. So, for instance, between 2017 and 2021, there were 2 million or so firearms that were sent to the ATF, it's alcohol, tobacco firearms, for tracing. Only 1.9% of them were ghost guns. Okay, so it's not a massive issue at this point in time, but it could grow. And that 1.9%, by the way, compares to 1.3% that came from government agencies. Yeah. It's a bit more of a concern. But anyway, that's firearms issued to police or soldiers. But anyway, they're trying to stop so the ATF were trying to stop the problem before it became a problem. And so the Gun Control Act of 1968 defines firearm to include a weapon that shoots, is designed to shoot, or may be readily converted to shoot a projectile by action of an explosive. The ATF in 2022 expanded that definition with a rule that include weapon parts kits that are designed to or may readily be completely assembled, restored, or otherwise converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. Okay, so they basically broadened the definition of what a firearm is to include these ghost gun kits. There was another rule involving frames and receivers that makes it all way more complicated. I won't get into that, but basically it does the same thing. Okay, I don't want to bog you down in detail. Well, I am, but I want to try to limit the amount of bogginess. After the waters of the USA ruling from the Supreme Court. I want to get rid of the bogs. Okay, so that does not make ghost guns illegal, note. That just makes them subject to regulation. The same regulations as guns have, normal guns. Then there was a classic Texas judge ruling. If you want to get something done and you're a conservative, you do it in Texas. Reed O'Connor ruled that ghost gun kits contain mere weapon parts, not weapons, and the ATF has no general authority to regulate. He vacated the rule on a nationwide basis. So basically he said, even though I'm not just ruling against this rule in my district, but the entire country, for those who think that's dodgy, and I'm one of them, the Liberals were doing plenty of that under Trump. That's been something that's been going for a while, like for about, it really, I mean, it's been going for more than a decade, but it's been going big time since Trump. And so, we kind of got to crack down on that, but both sides are saying you first. Anyway, so Thomas, by the way, is on the record against those nationwide injunctions. He hates them. And so is Gorsuch. And so is Barrett. 3 of them are all against those nationwide injunctions. So what happened? The Fifth Circuit didn't stay the ruling. They allowed that to hold. But the Supreme Court did, because Roberts and Barrett voted with the libs, 5-4. They haven't heard the case yet. They've just stayed the ruling. So the regulation is still in effect for ghost guns until the Supreme Court hears the case, which they may choose not to, but they at least want to just reserve the ability to take the case. So I think they're going to take the case, and Barrett might not rule on the side of gun regulation here. She might have just actually been consistent with her principles and just said, I hate these nationwide injunctions. That might have been what she was doing. We don't know. We'll find out. Right? But Gorsuch and Thomas, as I said, supposedly don't like these nationwide injunctions either, yet they're on the side of the nationwide injunction in this case. Now, this is the 6th time in 2 years that Barrett has overruled a lower court to stay one of these wild rulings. All 6 of the times she was doing the opposite of what the Fifth Circuit did. That's the Texas Circuit. So once again, she's showing some kind of independence here. The thing, by the way, as well, if you're a real conservative, I say a real conservative, if you are what I regard as a genuine conservative, you should be against all this shit. You should be overruling the Fifth Circuit, because the Fifth Circuit, in my view, is not practicing the rule of law. They're practicing conservative politics in courts. And if you're a conservative judge, like a small c conservative judge, you should be against that.
Judicial activism.
Exactly.
It's bad, right?
Exactly. Oh, so dry, Melina, so dry. Okay. The thing that I find... Well, first of all, what do you have to say about the ghost guns? Because it sounds like you got some views.
It's an interesting case to me. Like, from a policy perspective, treating these kits the same as guns with serial numbers and background checks feels reasonable to me. I'm not a gun person though, so I think other people disagree from a policy perspective. From a legal perspective, it's interesting in the sense of it's sort of a bit similar to what we were talking about with, where do you draw the line for, a gay wedding cake or a website. There is a genuine legal question here that reasonable minds can differ on, I think, of when is a gun a gun, because you can order gun parts in the mail if you have a gun and a part is broken. That's not ordering a gun. And it's about where do you draw the line? When does a kit become close enough to a gun that you should treat it as a gun? And my understanding of these kits is that you or I couldn't just in this room open the box and make a gun out of it. You have to like drill holes in parts of it and assemble it. It's not like something that just anybody could do, but it is not wildly difficult relative to you're not having to weld or something. In the case, both sides used analogies, neither of which felt very helpful to me. The government side said, every speaker of English would recognize that a tax on sales of bookshelves applies to IKEA when it sells boxes of parts and the tools and instructions for assembling them into bookshelves. I read that. I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
These are guns.
Yeah.
And then I heard the challenges and they said a better analogy would be to a taco kit sold as a bundle by a grocery store that includes taco shells, seasoning packets, salsa, and other toppings, along with a slab of raw beef. No one would call the taco kit a taco. In addition to assembly, turning it into one would require cutting or grinding and cooking the meat, and until that was done, it would be nonsensical to treat it as the food equivalent of a taco. I don't know. That doesn't sound that different to the IKEA analogy to me.
I'm going to jump in on that one. If you were regulating tacos...
Yeah.
Like if you think about what
if you were introducing a taco tax.
Yeah. Or you were saying, okay, tacos need to be, if you were some, food dictator and you were saying, you need to have X amount of fat or no more than X grams of fat in your taco. And like it would apply to the taco kit, sure.
Yeah. Like not just a pack of taco shells, but a taco kit that has the components, even if you do a bit of cooking. I would think you could reasonably call that a taco. So in that sense, I was like, well, I'm not convinced by that. But then having said that, like outside of the legal thing, because again, like I think this just comes down to you have to draw the line somewhere. This is kind of, my understanding is you get like about 80% of the gun parts in these kits. Is that a gun or not a gun? I don't know. But also just like even though from a policy perspective, I don't have a problem with it. It also doesn't feel like that big of a deal to me. Like in Australia, it feels like the kind of loophole that would be more meaningful.
Because there's so many guns in America already.
Well, exactly. So this is what I was sort of getting at before. Like there are already so many ways for criminals to get guns that are easier than getting these ghost guns, which are used in crime sometimes, but not in huge numbers. If you're a criminal, you can remove the serial number from a gun that you've gotten another way. You can steal a gun. You can get someone with a clean record to buy a gun for you, a straw buyer, which is very common. Yeah. You can buy a secondhand gun in a private sale, which doesn't require a background check and won't be traceable to you because the serial number is connected to someone else. Any gun manufactured before 1968, when serial numbers became mandatory, don't have serial numbers. There are millions of guns that fit that description in the States. And in terms of just further evidence of the extent to which how guns used in crimes are sourced. There was a survey of prison inmates in 2016 done by the Bureau of Justice. They said an estimated 287,400 prisoners had possessed a firearm during their offense that they were in jail for. And among these, 6% had stolen the gun, 7% found the gun at the scene of the crime, 43% obtained it off the street or from an underground market. So that's the plurality. 25% got it from a family member or a friend or as a gift. And just 7% had purchased it under their own name from a licensed firearm dealer. So I don't think that, obviously you need to have a regulation in place and you need to define what it is. So it makes sense to me that this is going through the courts. But I've seen quite a few breathless headlines about how these ghost guns are going to have all these criminals with untraceable guns, which most guns aren't traced in criminal investigations anyway, and kids making them and taking them to school and blah, blah. Kids get guns from their parents who don't put them in safes properly all the time. Like, it's not good. I'm not saying that, to me, the less guns the better, personally. That's my bias. But having said that, I find it hard to get swept up in these ghost guns are a big deal that are going to make America heaps more unsafe, because America has plenty of dangerous guns, whether they regulate the ghost guns or not.
I think that's a strong argument. I think that's good. I like that. It's a good one. I suppose what I would respond to that with is that, I think I totally agree with you that from a practical point of view, there's only so much. Once you get to 100% gun saturation, like there's no 101%. It's just you start getting people with 2 guns. It's like, and America is at the point where there's just so many guns out there that practically speaking, it might not make a huge difference. But I do think that if you are coming from the angle, I understand that right now the Supreme Court is in a position where they're loosening the laws on guns generally. But if you are coming from the perspective of hoping that one day America deals with guns in some capacity, like this feels like a potential divide by which it makes potential future regulation almost impossible. Like it's one of those you can't put the genie back in the bottle type scenarios. Where if somehow you can pass some kind of regulation in some respect, then the ghost guns outlet will become massive. Having said that, in this hypothetical world we talked about, they'd be able to, because there is actually a completely different area from which, what you just said is all great. That's not me being patronizing. That's true. It's great. But there is another area another legal area this whole case belongs in, which is what's the role of the ATF and what's the role of Congress? Because the ATF passed their rule, right? Normally,
it's not a law passed by Congress.
Yeah, normally you go, well, that's
yeah.
Congress's job to do this.
Yeah.
Right? In this world where they get some kind of gun regulation, then Congress the first thing they would do is pass a law out regulating ghost guns. So it is a genie that can be put back in the bottle. So I think that's probably a fair point.
Although the other genie out of the bottle thing I just thought of as we were talking, which I suppose this could potentially set a bad precedent for something which could be more problematic, is 3D printing, which is not there yet. But down the line, if that technology becomes more available, is it a gun if you get emailed a file that you can use to print a gun at home? That would be problematic, I think, because that is something then that anybody can do. I question how many kids can make a gun out of these ghost gun. Obviously some can, because some have, but it's not so easy. But once you get the technology to make this really easy, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think you've got great points. And I also think that just to make explicit something you implied as well, if you have the ability to make a ghost gun from a kit, you definitely have the know-how to buy an illegal gun. The kids who might struggle to get an illegal gun right now will probably struggle to make a ghost gun. So I think that's a fair call. Nice one. Talk to me about pills.
Yeah, this one I'm a lot angrier about.
Yeah.
So back in April, people might remember there were dueling rulings, it's hard to say, on the same day about the abortion drug mifepristone.
Yes.
One ruling in Washington state directed the FDA to maintain access to the drug. The other ruling in Texas invalidated the drug's FDA approval, which effectively banned it nationwide. Texas again.
Yeah, single judge in Texas.
Medication abortion is now the most common way women get abortions in the US, and it's a key target of both pro-choice and anti-abortion movements post-Dobbs.
Yeah.
The Texas ruling is the first time a court has overruled the FDA's approval of any drug.
Of any drug.
So it's significant.
Yeah.
And it's a drug that's been on the market and used safely for more than 20 years. So it's unusual. The ruling was partly upheld by the Fifth Circuit. The Supreme Court then granted a stay on the ruling. Similar situation, which means the drug will stay on the market until the Supreme Court can rule on it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the judge.
Let's talk about the judge.
His name is Kaczmarek.
Well, actually, before we talk about the judge, can I just throw in, I don't know if you're about to do this, if you're just doing a different order. Are you about to say the details of what the FDA actual rules were? Or not?
Possibly, but you can say...
Because I feel like people should know what we're talking about before we get into the judge.
Do that.
Okay, just very quickly. There are two sets of rulings. In 2016, the FDA increased the gestational age limit for the abortion pill for mifepristone. I can't say it. Mifepristone from 7 weeks to 10 weeks. They also reduced the number of required in-person clinic visits before it could be prescribed from 3 to 1. And they allowed healthcare providers other than doctors to prescribe the drug. So for those who are keeping track of that, until 2016, you needed to, bear in mind that many women don't even know they're pregnant until 4 or 5 weeks pregnancy. You need to visit a doctor 3 times before you are 7 weeks pregnant to get prescribed this drug. And then 2016, they relaxed it to one visit of a non-doctor within
a doctor
10 weeks.
or another healthcare provider.
Exactly. Yeah, within 10 weeks. Then in 2021, the FDA loosened it further to allow mifepristone to be prescribed virtually, like online, and then received by mail.
Which happened in a COVID context, but then they wanted to keep that ruling in place because they said there's no reason not to have that improved access.
So that's the background what we're talking about. Go for it.
Okay, so a little bit on this judge. He's a Trump appointee. He's already been overruled by the Supreme Court on a ruling where he tried to force the Biden administration to keep Trump's Remain in Mexico policy in place. In his ruling in this case, he used a lot of loaded language that's common in the anti-abortion movement. He used terms such as unborn human and unborn child instead of fetus.
And we're talking for a 7-week-old fetus.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
He called doctors who provide abortions abortionists, and he referred to medication abortion as chemical abortion. So he made also a lot of statements that sort of clearly showed his hand in terms of his opinions on abortion being very damaging and things of that nature, but he also used the specific terminology that's used in the anti-abortion movement. So he has a clear point of view on abortion as a moral issue and a political issue, which is not supposed to influence his rulings on a legal question. So let's talk about some of the legal issues with this case.
Let's do that.
To bring a lawsuit in the US, which we have already talked about on the show, you have to have standing. You have to prove you've been personally harmed by a policy to be able to sue. The standing in this case is quite dubious, I would argue.
Yes.
The plaintiffs are doctors who oppose abortion. They don't personally prescribe the drugs, as is their right. But they argue that women who
How does it affect them? How does it affect them,
It's a
Melina?
good question. Well, they argue that women who are prescribed the drug by other doctors might have complications from taking that drug.
They might,
and then they might end up in the emergency department. And if that happened, these doctors might end up having to treat these women. And if that happened, these doctors might experience harm because treating these patients would divert their time and resources away from treating other patients.
Okay.
And also potentially force them to compromise their morality by completing an incomplete abortion.
Yeah, okay.
But not even necessarily that. They argued it's going to hurt me because it's going to take my time and focus to treat these women, these hypothetical women that they've never had to treat in their lives, instead of other people they'd rather be treating.
So, Melina, let me ask you this. Riddle me this, Melina. Couldn't this same logic be used for those doctors to get standing to sue anyone over anything that could cause any injury whatsoever?
Sure. I would also say that logic could be used by pro-abortion doctors to say that they might have to theoretically treat women forced to continue a pregnancy if abortion is banned. And that would take their time and resources away from treating other people. 1% of women who have medication abortions end up requiring hospitalization. The hospitalization rate for women who carry a pregnancy to term is quite a bit higher than 1%.
Yes, it would be. It would be. That's true.
But it's also just legally so dubious that standing is not supposed to encompass potential harm. We did touch on that in the gay marriage website case, but she at least had some argument of potential harm because she was saying that the fear of being sued was preventing her from starting a business and that was causing her financial harm. So you can, that's debatable, but that at least made it wasn't totally hypothetical. She was arguing that she was actually experiencing harm now. These doctors are basing their standing on something completely hypothetical, which you're not supposed to do. It's not supposed to be the law.
Yeah, and the chances are so unlikely because it involves, first of all, the person having complications, which as you say is 1%. Then them choosing to go to the emergency room that doctor happens to be working at, and all the other doctors happening to be busy, and that doctor then being forced to treat that particular woman.
And also, it's not great from a doctor's perspective to be so mad that your time and resources is going to treating a patient that you don't like.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to do that.
Can I ask just, because I know more about the Fifth Circuit than Kaczmarek, the single judge. I don't know if this is from the Fifth Circuit or from Kaczmarek, but I read that one of them also was talking about how the women who had these complications might experience regret and trauma, and that might make the doctors experience regret and trauma. Was that Kaczmarek, or was that
the focusing on the harm that would come to the women having these abortions was a big part of his ruling.
That's great.
I don't really follow how that affects the doctors, but an example is a quote from his ruling that kind of touches on that a bit. He says, considering the FDA's 2021 decision to permit mail-in chemical abortions, many women and girls will consume mifepristone without physician supervision. And in maternity care deserts, women may not have ready access to emergency care. In sum, there are fewer safety restrictions for women and girls today than ever before. Plaintiffs will have good reasons to believe their alleged injuries will continue in the future and possibly with greater frequency than in the past. Again, if you care about the health of women who live in a maternity care desert, maybe don't force them to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term.
Maybe. Okay.
Especially because the drugs are not just used for abortions, but they're also used to manage spontaneous miscarriages. So it's not even just about, I don't want to have a baby. It's women who are undergoing a healthcare emergency for which that is the best treatment. Or not necessarily emergency, sorry, but a healthcare issue for which that's the best treatment. And he's doing this under the guise of wanting to protect women and women's health. He also says the plaintiffs are likely to suffer irreparable harm if the motion is not granted. At least 2 women died from chemical abortion drugs just last year. Do you know how many women died of maternal causes in the US in 2021, which is the most recent year that complete data is available?
Please tell me, Melina.
1,205. It's quite a lot more than 2.
I love your work.
The abortion drugs are also so safe that according to the FDA, who put this in their filing to the court, the risk of death by taking Viagra is nearly 10 times higher.
Oh, how about that? By the way, we shouldn't lose track of the fact that when you're talking about the victims, he's not talking about the women dying. He's talking about the doctors who treat the women who die.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
He must hate men to be so unconcerned with their safety. It's also quite legally dubious. This thing about the timing. You mentioned the few points along the way that access to the drug has been loosened. So it was first approved in 2000.
Yep.
Then there was an easing of restrictions in 2016 and a further one in 2021.
Yeah.
The statute of limitations for challenging FDA approval of a drug is 6 years.
I see.
You might notice that 2000 is quite a lot longer than 6 years ago.
Did Kaczmarek say?
He argues that every time they updated the approval with new conditions, it resets the clock.
Oh, of course.
This is a contested legal argument.
Oh, God. Okay.
Yeah.
Radio.
I don't know how far that one's going to get. But that one was partly rejected by the Fifth Circuit. So they basically partially upheld the ruling, which is to say that they could only challenge up to the 2016 one, which is still more than 6 years, but I don't know if they're counting from when the lawsuit started. It might have started a year ago. And they threw out the original part. And then the Supreme Court put a stay on it.
Yeah.
And presumably we'll hear
So just to be clear, what that means is that everything that Kaczmarek and the Fifth Circuit did doesn't matter. It's continuing on as before these law cases until the Supreme Court decides whether they're going to hear the case or not.
Yeah. So it's all on hold.
Yeah.
I assume the Supreme Court will hear it, even though the whole point of Dobbs was that they wanted to get out of abortion and leave it to politics. They will probably rule on this.
Yeah.
I think if they do, they'll overrule it.
I think they will too.
To me, it's very different to Roe v. Wade and Dobbs, where Roe v. Wade, like obviously that was like a big deal to overturn it, but the ruling on which that was based was contentious legally. There was a legal argument for the decision making. Like I will acknowledge that, even if I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
The legal underpinnings of this are so flawed.
Yes.
I mean, it's unbelievable that it's gotten this far. I think enough of the Supreme Court I hope I don't live to regret this prediction, but I think enough of them care about their legal credibility, and this just is so obviously not consistent with that if it comes to them hearing it, I don't think that they're going to uphold it.
I agree.
We'll see.
Now, are you across much of the Fifth Circuit ruling, or have you focused on our friend Kaczmarek?
Focus more on Kaczmarek. So tell us about the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah, the reason why Kaczmarek, by the way, I just connect the dots for people there at home. The reason why Kaczmarek in particular is worth focusing on, he's definitely worth focusing on, is because there are probably 5 or 6 sort of Trump hero judges, and who are going to be the ones that they choose the next Supreme Court bench from, and Kaczmarek is one of them. So
terrifying.
Yeah. So that may be a little taste of the future. But
again,
as you say,
it's not the conservatism; it's the hackishness of the ruling.
Totally,
it's so bad.
Yeah, but also, as you say from before, he might be just auditioning in a particularly haphazard way. You know?
I suspect not on his case.
No, I think he's
it's a little bit too far gone.
Anyway, okay, let me talk about the Fifth Circuit briefly. Because as you say, they've left the 2000 ruling alone. Then they're focused on 2016 and 2021. They got their own problems, and they have their own little star, James Ho, who has a bit to do with this as well. And he weighed in on why the 2016 ruling and 2021 ruling were a problem. I just want to just go through their legal judgment for you. These are the grounds against the 2016 ruling. Now, the FDA did consider safety. Basically, they came down. They ruled against it because of safety reasons, right? The FDA did consider safety for the 10-week bit, for the extending from 7 weeks to 10 weeks. The FDA analysed 4 observational studies and 1 systematic review involving over 30,000 women. They studied the effect of mifepristone up to 10 weeks, which is what you need to do. They concluded it worked the same up to 10 weeks or 7 weeks. No problems. Number 2, for reducing the clinic visits from 3 to 1, they based it on 11 studies with over 30,000 participants, and they found exceedingly, quote, low rates of serious adverse events, and with rates of common adverse events comparable to those in the studies of clinic administration of misoprostol that supported the initial approval in mifepristone, that supported the initial approval in 2000. The non-doctors thing, rather than doctors and other healthcare professionals, they based that on 4 studies with 3,200 women in randomized controlled clinical trials and 596 women in prospective cohorts. The studies were conducted in varying settings, international, urban, rural, low resource, and found no differences in efficacy, serious adverse events, ongoing pregnancy, or incomplete abortion between the groups. Also, they look at studies with combined the measures. So that's pretty good. Now, the Fifth Circuit said they should have tried all 3 together. All 3 measures together, studies, right? And since they failed to explicitly explain why they did not, their decision to approve the amendments was likely arbitrary and capricious. Now, they argued 0 effects plus 0 effects equals 0 effects. They also made the point, even if you disagree with that, won't let the FDA consider it. Fine. No, they outright eradicated the ruling completely from scratch because it didn't have the magic words. They said, quote, it's far from certain that FDA could cure its mistakes with further consideration. Why not? Also, when mifepristone was approved in 2000, the FDA required prescribers to report all serious adverse events, both fatal and non-fatal. In 2016, the FDA decided that going forward, prescribers would only have to report fatal events, because they said it's been around for 16 years now, we've got enough data, and the drug manufacturer themselves note non-fatal events. Fifth Circuit said that change was arbitrary and capricious. So in 2021, when the FDA decided that they would allow prescription by mail, the Fifth Circuit struck it down because they said it didn't have reliable safety data to base that decision upon. So now they've got to start from scratch. So that was their logic. So there we go.
And it's worth saying explicitly, and reiterating that it's never happened before that a court has overturned FDA approval over the FDA's objections. Like, judges are not medical experts. They are theoretically legal experts, but it's not a good thing for judges to be second-guessing medical experts based on their own interpretation of medical data. I'm not saying that this thing should be above scrutiny, but these are people who do not have the expertise to overrule the scientists that are providing this data.
No. So, got any conclusions on this stuff?
He's a rising star to watch.
Do you have any other Supreme Court thoughts? We've talked a lot about that.
I checked at one point we were talking, Clarence Thomas went to Yale. So correct myself there.
Thank you very much. I'll save the ethics stuff for another day. Now, I had potpourri to come, but I'm just looking at time. We've been at it for a long time. yeah. So maybe we should wrap up on this. Do you have anything particular about potpourri that you would like to bring? Any polls that you think will be worth bringing to people? I'll save my polls for some other time. But do you have anything that you'd like to bring to people?
I'm trying to see if it's worth running through this thing really quickly. All right, I'm going to say shout out 2 poll numbers really quickly because they're interesting and they might feel dated by the next time around. There was a CBS YouGov poll the other day that had some really interesting results in it, and particularly about the opinions of Trump voters in the primary. And I think they say a few kind of interesting things about the headspace of people voting in or intending to vote in the Republican primary. So when asked who did they think would beat Biden in a head-to-head race, 61% said Trump would definitely beat Biden, and the next highest was DeSantis at 35%.
So what's the Trump number again?
61%.
61 versus 35%.
35 was the next highest for DeSantis. And that to me is just, it says everything about where this race is at and why it's not really a race. Because also you didn't have to pick only one. They were asked about different candidates. So people were able to say DeSantis would also beat Biden. And these people all think Biden is garbage. And only a third thought DeSantis, and even less for anyone else, was a strong chance to beat Biden. And everyone, 61%, think Trump can. So the electability argument is going nowhere for any Republican in the race other than Trump.
That's a really, really, really good stat. Like honestly, I'm glad you brought that up because I mean, it makes supporting Trump perfectly rational.
Yes.
Yeah, like even if you hate the guy, like if you're a Republican, you want to win the election. The thing I find weird is that I mean, there's a bit of inconsistency here that they think Joe Biden is so senile that that he can barely tie his own shoelaces, but they think only 35% think that DeSantis could beat him.
Yeah, and I was just double checking to make sure I had this right, but this is Republican voters, so it's not Trump supporters. Yeah. It's Republican voters. I don't even understand why that is because I mean, I just feel like they are continuously fed the message and would be inclined to believe this, that Biden is hopeless, he's senile, he's like ruining the country, and people don't think anyone but Trump is likely to beat him. So I think everyone else is on a hiding to nothing as long as the electorate thinks that.
The other thing that's so weird about that is you just go, okay, there are 3 kinds of voter. There is the Democrat, the Republican, and the independent. No one's thinking that Democrats are voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Right. So there's only one of 2 things that could be the case. Either they think more independents would vote for Trump over DeSantis, even though Trump has the most appallingly high unfavorable numbers, or they think Republicans wouldn't turn out for DeSantis. And that might be true. Yeah. But that's on them. Yeah. If they want to beat Biden, it's on them. That's really weird.
Yeah. I was just quite surprised by the level of the gap between that, and it's even lower for the others. I've lost it now. It's not even worth saying. But like low teens and single digits for anyone else. The other really interesting result in that poll was for this is Trump voters specifically, and they were asked. This is hard to phrase or paraphrase, but they were basically asked who do they feel what they tell you is true. So when you hear something from this X group, you think that they're telling you the truth. Yeah. This is Trump voters. 71% said Trump. Yeah. It's still low for Trump voters, but high overall. 63% for friends and family. 56% for conservative media figures, and 42% for religious leaders.
Geez, how do you like to be a religious leader in that list?
Well, that number, the religious leaders part interested me because I've long thought that Trump's success is the end result of treating politics as entertainment. Yeah. That if you treat politics as entertainment, as we have, and particularly America has for particularly the last few decades since the rise of cable news, you will eventually end up with people voting for entertainers. And that explains a lot to me about why Trump has been so successful in this landscape. But this also suggests to me that politics is taking the place of religion. And that to me is not a healthy thing.
No, it's not.
I don't think you have to be religious, but politics is a bad replacement for religion.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, it goes without saying as well, but yeah, the fact that we're not even talking about approval here. We're talking about that you believe what they say is true.
Yeah. And it was actually, on the religious thing, just quickly as well, there was recently a guy, I think he's the former head of the, Russell Moore, he's now the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, former leader of the Southern Baptists, and he was warning that he's heard from multiple church leaders that people started to complain that teachings of the Bible are just liberal talking points. Oh, God. And it's just really, for the party of religion in not so recent memory, or in recent memory, sorry, it's quite a departure. But yeah, I mean, 71% for Trump and 63% for friends and family is pretty grim. Like, that is, I know everyone's always like, it's a cult, but that kind of is culty when you believe Trump is telling you the truth more than your friends and family. Yeah. Those people to me are very unreachable at this point.
That same poll, I should say, had another one that was along the same lines. It was GOP primary voters here, not Trump voters, GOP primary voters who say honesty is very important for their vote. Trump's winning 61% to 17% from DeSantis' second.
Yeah, because he's the only one who tells them the truth.
And Ramaswamy was 6%, 5% Pence. 5% Pence. How would you be if you're Pence? And yet the people at 61% were saying Trump is the honest one. Anyway, we're really out of time.
Yes, that's enough.
Thank you so much, Melina, for that. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
No one else could have done this Supreme Court stuff. I really, really appreciate it. And I was hanging to do it. Thank you all. Elle Hardy is going to be on Friday, I hope. Fingers crossed. And I'll see Dave the week after that. And I'll see you soon enough, Melina. Stay peppy.
It's Vivek like cake. I'm not fake, and I swim in a lake of truth. That's me, Vivek. Yeah.